Your son, he's gone.
He was weak and foolish, like his father.
So I destroyed him.
Hello, and welcome to the Weak and Foolish Movie Podcast. My name is Mike Tang, and with me are my fellow podcasters, Job Ang.
Hello.
Paul Shu.
Hello.
Albert Liu.
Hello, everyone.
Joining us is our recurring TV junkie, Mrs. Hannah Lee Tseng. Welcome back, Hannah.
Hello.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about Season 1, Episodes 6-9 of the HBO video game adaptation, The Last of Us. All the dudes on this podcast have played The Last of Us video games. We're all pretty big fans. Our guest, Hannah, has not played the games and is experiencing The Last of Us for the first time. All right, so to save time in our discussion, we're only going to be hearing from Hannah for our non-spoiler section. So Hannah, now that the show and the story for the first game is finished, it's complete, you now know the whole thing, just give us your overall non-spoiler thoughts on The Last of Us.
Couple things. I think as we talk through like the last, 4 episodes? The second half of, the season, maybe my opinions will change, but I actually think the first half was better than the second half.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, potentially. But again, this could change during our discussion. That's kind of how I felt, that a lot of it is kind of around like the pacing and kind of like the odd narratives that started to kind of pop up as like the episodes went on. And then second, I'm not exactly sure if I'm okay with how season 1 ended.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would definitely want to have a discussion around that.
Yeah. I actually, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was how you felt about the pacing of the show. Like, did you think this first season could have been just expanded to more episodes or maybe expanded to an additional season?
Yeah, I think potentially it could have, because I feel like every time they introduced like a new character, they were kind of irrelevant in the next episode, right? Or there wasn't much like building upon multiple like character storylines. It was definitely kind of like the focal point was obviously Joel and Ellie. So I think that was fine, but it would have been nice to kind of see character development for other characters potentially. And if they had more episodes, I think that could have been done. So that was kind of like unfortunate, I think. But also there wasn't as much zombie stuff as I thought there would be. Yeah, so that's very interesting. I mean, maybe in the game it's completely different, but at least in the show, did feel like, and again, this might be just kind of what they intended, is that there could potentially be scarier things out there, post-apocalyptic, scarier than zombies, right? And kind of going through like what Joel and Ellie are dealing with and experiencing as they go on their journey. So yeah, I don't know. I think there was potential to have like better storytelling, but I also kind of wonder if it would have flourished more, at least in my mind, if episodes had come out like multiple episodes at a time versus like one a week. Yeah. And I think that kind of has to do with pacing too, because to be honest, there were some episodes where I felt like it wasn't very great, or I just didn't feel like there was like a point to it. So if they had done like, release like 2 or 3 episodes a week, maybe it would have been a little bit different. But again, there's only 9 episodes total, so I totally understand. But yeah, initial thoughts.
Cool. Yeah, I'm actually really excited to talk more specifics. I want to know which episodes you actually thought were weak. So we're going to move on to the spoiler discussion now.
No, you're still holding on! Let go!
To those listening, now that The Last of Us has completed its first season, we're going to divulge all the details about the first game only. All right. We will not talk about The Last of Us Part 2, the game. All right. So we're not going to talk about any details about what happens after this story. All right, so we're going to start with episode 6, titled Kin. This is where Joel and Ellie, they find Tommy in Jackson, Wyoming. And the first part is Joel and Ellie, they travel together. This is 3 months after Henry and Sam, have died. Their encounter with them in Kansas City. And now they're in this snowy area in Wyoming. I think right off the bat, I thought what was cool was seeing Joel's map interrogation technique. We only saw him use it once in the game, and then here he's asking 2 different people the location of where they could possibly find, I think, Tommy, right? And so he's trying to get them to match their stories by pointing to the same place on the map. I thought that was cool that we get to see him use it in a non-violent way. Any thoughts on this whole sequence? I mean, we also have Joel and Ellie by the campfire as well.
I thought it was great. I mean, the torture sequence, if they have left that out, I would have been really ticked off. As just someone who found that, it adds to this sense that Joel's a dangerous character, even if he has sort of softened up. He's still killer, and that's something the game really honed on pretty well. And I'm glad that I mean, I think I went back and looked at the cutscenes. It's pretty much almost the same thing. I think it's actually probably more gruesome in the TV version, because I think in the game he gets stabbed sort of in the thigh or the lower thigh, but over here it's in the kneecap, like right on it. So
I think in the game he stabs him in the knee. Also, he says he'll pop off his knee.
yeah, but I don't know if it was as gruesome, especially with I don't know if he like did that extra turn on the kneecap quite the same way, but yeah.
I think it's definitely more visceral when we're seeing it in live action, right? Like, I definitely felt the same reaction. It was like a lot more intense, I suppose. So I agree with Albert there.
Yeah, we are getting ahead of ourselves. That is like a later episode in episode 8. But going back to Joel and Ellie's travels, they have that campfire moment, which I could have had an entire episode of them just hanging out and talking to each other. I think that would have been really nice. But you see both characters opening up way more. Joel starts talking about what he might do after all this is over, after they get to the Fireflies, and they talk about life after. And I think that's, it kind of shows how far this relationship has gone from Boston, where they don't want to have anything to do with each other.
Okay, viewers, apology time. I thought Mike was talking about a later scene, but you're right. It's totally in that. He does do sort of a non-violent version of the map trick in that episode. And probably the most interesting thing was seeing the introduction of 2 new characters that we've never seen in in the game, but also sort of interesting to see them because I don't think we've seen a couple sort of out on their own, surviving the pandemic and just sort of just chilling and having even a sense of humor about everything. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was like pretty intentional and obvious why they placed that scene there, coming right off of the Henry and Sam episode, right? Which was like deeply emotional and complicated and just like gut wrenching. So I thought it was like a pretty good segue into the next episode. I actually like really enjoyed that. So I would imagine if I had watched those episodes back to back, it would have been kind of like a good break between like all the drama, basically.
It was nice that they got to live. We are introduced to new characters and they didn't die. It's a breath of fresh air, right?
Yeah, except the Ellie Jack's like one of their things. He just takes it.
Oh, one of the like rabbits or something, right?
Yeah. She just like
Oh,
is
yeah.
like hanging there by the door, and then on their way
Yeah.
out, she just takes it out. Like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna. This is mine now.
And then they die of starvation off screen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was kind of like a humorous scene, like an old married couple. They've been around with each other for a long time in isolation, and yeah, their sense of humor is still intact. That scene where they encounter uh people of Jackson, on horseback, and then they use the dog to kind of sniff out whether they are infected. That was a pretty dang intense scene.
Yeah, I really like that scene. That was not in the game, and I think they hit all the like dramatic notes that they needed to do, um, especially because that whole encounter is quite different in the game. Like, there's an area that they don't even visit in the show, and they substituted for an area in the second game. So I think it's understandable why they made the changes that they made, but I think the way that they did it, it was great.
Yeah, I too was a little thrown off by that because in the video game, the dam that's lurking nearby is a whole level, and it's a fun one too.
Yeah.
So, but I honestly didn't mind the change at this point. I mean, I think we've talked about it in the first part. The show it seems to be more interesting, at least to me, that when it's not so focused on trying to recreate the big action scenes as much, and sort of focusing more on character development and narrative.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and then we get to Jackson, Wyoming. What were all of your impressions of Jackson? In the video game, we never got to see it until the second game, so it was kind of surprising seeing it fully realized here.
Yeah, I saw the power plant and I thought, oh, here we go. Like we're
Hmm.
gonna spend some time there, and I got this tinge of nostalgia for that level because it was a lot of fun. But I actually felt like it was even more rewarding and meaningful storytelling wise to show Jackson in all its realization, because I think it shows like the possibility in this world that like life can go on. And I think it sows a seed for later on in the mind of Joel, like where, I mean, we won't talk about it for now because I think it'll connect it to the very end. But I really liked it, and the possible Easter egg we saw too,
Mm,
if you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
yeah, I
So
think that's
Leo points at the screen moment.
Yes, I literally pointed at the screen.
So for people like Hannah who don't know what we're talking about, there's a scene where Joel and Ellie are eating their first meal at Jackson, and Ellie's like scarfing out her food, and she notices there's a girl hiding behind a pillar looking at Ellie, and then Ellie kind of barks at her, and then that girl kind of walks away. That is really brief moment that you probably wouldn't think anything of that character, but she is a character from The Last of Us 2 named Dina. So nice little Easter egg.
mm.
I
Yeah,
thought it
I-
was obvious, even though I have not played the second game,
oh dang.
that there was like a connection.
Mhm.
But it just could be because I watch a lot of TV.
Mm.
So
Everything
get all
counts.
you get all the visual cues. You're like that can't be for no reason.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, film studies.
Right.
All we do in discussion,
Okay.
right?
All the
Okay.
French avant-garde movies we
You're
watch just
right.
kicking in now.
I mean, so obvious.
Just for some added context, Albert and Hannah both have master's degrees in film studies.
From prestigious university, UC
Yeah.
Irvine.
Yes.
And by master degree, I mean, well, you guys have an undergraduate degree in it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah.
You don't
So
see me
basically
now,
masters.
but I get Hannah's expression right there.
By the way, I was not throwing shade at UC Irvine. That's my alma mater also. So I think it's a fantastic school.
Yeah, I think
Watching
Mike
our
loves it the most.
yeah, watching our film professors get picked off by like schools like USC and stuff, that was great.
Oh, heck yeah.
Well, that just means that, they were leading a robust program.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, a program we were all a part of, and now we're now experts in film and TV.
100%.
So I kind of saw their portrayal of Jackson. I was kind of looking at it as like, okay, so we've seen the Boston QZ, we've seen the Kansas City QZ rebellion led by Kathleen, and they've all failed in some sense, right? Boston was kind of like a dystopian, authoritarian, like government. Kansas City was just straight up like, they were taking advantage of the people, they were exploiting them, they were clear oppression, and the rebellion itself, was chaos. And then we have later on in episode 8, there is a theocracy led by a white man, and all those communities that we see in this show have failed in some way. And then here in this community in Jackson is a community that thrives, it works, and it's led by a Black woman. So I thought that I just thought it was a little bit on the nose, a little bit. I kind of rolled my eyes. Oh yeah, all the white people are bad. You need people of color and women to lead. I don't know if that's what the show was saying, but it just kind of is in line with the times, and it felt a little bit political and agenda driven. So I kind of wish they left that a little bit out of it. I mean, there's even a line where Maria says, "Oh yeah, we're communists."
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh,
Yeah,
I kind of
if you
groaned.
listen to the podcast, I mean, Craig Mazin really kind of makes no secret of his thoughts about how he thinks theocracies are, but he makes some joke, I think, about how he thinks communism or socialism might work in small bites, like in maybe a smaller form. But yeah, he didn't shy away from I think all of that. I think obviously that was definitely intentional, based on how he constructed the series.
Yeah, I just think for a show like that's called The Last of Us, right? I think the point was like humanity. There's so much corruption in humanity, and there's so much depravity in humanity, and The Last of Us really, it shows like the worst side of humanity. So I guess it is this community, little small community, shows that there is some hope that we can maybe pull through this as people, as humans. But I just didn't. I don't know. I guess the usage of that word communist, and we're communes, and and yeah, I guess it just didn't sit right. I've the podcast that Albert is referring to is the Last of Us podcast, the official one, that's released after every episode. So Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, the showrunners, they kind of talk through their decisions for the creative decisions for the show. I don't know. What did you guys? What did everyone else think of that? Were you okay with it, or did you kind of feel like, did you also roll your eyes?
But yeah, I'll go first. I mean, it's kind of I don't want to give away too much, but it almost felt like they wanted you to see more of Jackson this time. I don't know what their long-term plans are for the series, but it feels like they wanted you to see more of it this time so they can establish it now instead of doing it later. It's remarkable. I mean, as a set, I mean, I'll be frank. I don't think any, what you had said bothered me, because I think this game in a way kind of, already had portrayed this town as a bit of the most idealistic place to be during this time. But I have to say I was very, very impressed with the production design
Oh
and
yeah.
how they were they managed to sort of make you feel in a very short amount of time that this was a pretty well planned community.
Mhm.
I feel like it serves. I agree. By the way, yeah. What great points, Albert. I think that seeing Jackson like this and seeing something that can work, I think, serves the character of Joel really well in this, and the motivation, which is that he wants to leave Ellie with Tommy, and like this is like a great way to show like that it could have been possible for him to just end the journey there and leave her behind with Tommy, and she's gonna be okay in a good, or like have them take over in the journey to take her to the Fireflies. And I feel like seeing a functioning society like this kind of accentuates Joel feeling like I couldn't even live up to how effective these people would be. Um, yeah, I think like it was a little on the nose, the whole like commune language, but I think they were really trying to show like that, hey, this actually can work, and it kind of fuels Joel's conflict later on in the episode.
Yeah, that's fair. I agree with you too, Mike. I think when they say that they're like communists, that was like the one line where I was like, whoa, that came out of nowhere. You know, it just it did feel like it was really like shoehorned in. And for those who haven't played the game, like Maria is white in the game, so I wonder if that went into if there is a context for that, because like you were saying, Mike, like the only functioning society in this world that we've seen so far has been run by a black woman. And I don't know if, you know, that was their intention to like, oh, we have to cast a black woman for this or something. I don't think it was, because I think, you know, as for everyone else in the show, they cast based on like who they thought was the best person. So I think that just happened to align. But yeah, in the game, I mean, I guess it is it's a bit more subtle. I mean, I don't think they really draw any attention to the fact that like, oh, like we're the best because Maria runs this place. It's just that's just how it is. But yeah, I think drawing attention to it didn't really bother me, only because uh I feel like I've seen enough shows where they do push that message a bit more, where this one didn't bother me as much. So I guess just because I've seen it a lot, um but I mean, kind of going off of what Albert was saying, like I think I do take advantage of or take for granted the fact that the sets look so good. I mean, it just straight up looks like it's from Last of Us Part Two. Like when they're walking around Jackson, I was like, man, like it's so good, and it's not, most of it isn't CG. Like they practically created, especially that city, right? That's just like built from the ground up. So I thought that was just, I mean, I wonder how much time it took, how much money from their budget, but it looked exactly the same. So I thought that was great. um and definitely, yeah, I think they're setting up for it was definitely like intentional to introduce that, you know, when it wasn't introduced in the first game, and just giving you an idea of like what's to come in the second season. um but yeah, I think overall, like I wasn't too bothered by that one scene, but that one line did feel kind of like, what the heck was that for? So
Well, I felt like they led into it like pretty well though, because I think they said like, I think she mentioned that it's like a democratically elected like council or something.
mm,
Like everyone pitches in and shares. Like I didn't, as a casual viewer, like someone that hasn't played the game, like I didn't really like get that vibe that they were really trying to push that. And let's be fair, like even like the definition of communism, like it's kind of like a wide, there could potentially be like a wide spectrum of what people expect or think that it's like, right? So
yeah.
I think, yeah, I think in a just like a post-apocalyptic world where you have like raiders and like just like people that are stealing from other people, everyone out to get each other and kill each other, like living in like this commune basically where like everyone cares about everyone else's welfare. Like I can imagine how that would be delightful,
Yeah, yeah.
to like people that come upon the civilization.
It definitely brought me back to my old high school debate days when we were, sometimes you were often chose to like defend positions that you didn't necessarily agree with, but it's debate, so that's the whole point. But I remember one of our favorite arguments our debate coach taught us to do was like, what would happen? We got into an argument where we start arguing about the value of money in an apocalyptic setting. It was like, well, just use the barter argument. I was like, oh, okay, but does that work? And the whole debate would be about whether it work or not. But it was kind of interesting to see that happen in this sort of town in Jackson. And I have to say, I also do have a little bit of bias about whether a place like that can work, just because one of my favorite photographers to follow, a guy named Jimmy Chin, lives in Jackson, and based on all this video that I've seen of him interacting with his neighbors, I was like, oh, it's like a little town where everybody likes each other. That's interesting. So I guess maybe that sort of factored into the believability aspect of it for me.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it's just about survival. And like what Hannah was saying, like they're just looking out for each other. And they're not talking about like the economical, like, oh, innovation is fueled by capitalism type stuff. Because they don't have time to worry about those kinds of things. They got raiders and clickers to worry about. So yeah, I think for a show that clearly does try to push a message, I think they do it like pretty subtly, and I think it's about as good as you can get, honestly.
Yeah, I don't want to take away from just how like this community was portrayed in the show. Obviously, the production value is just stunning, and the town they found is just perfectly captures what we saw in the game. So I completely agree with you all. I just think, and it didn't bother me too much. It didn't take away from the episode. I still thought this was a very strong episode, and this whole Jackson sequence was really awesome. So I just wanted to bring that point up, just because I did feel like it momentarily distracted me from, it kind of took me out of what was already like a really great world building moment for the show.
For sure.
All right, let's move on and let's talk about, there's two sets of conversations that happen between two different sets of characters. There's Joel and Tommy, and then Ellie and Maria. Joel and Tommy, they have two conversations, one in the bar and one in the shoe shop at night. And then Ellie and Maria have a conversation as Maria cuts Ellie's hair. I want to talk about the Joel and Tommy conversation, because this version of Joel shows far more emotion than he ever expressed in the game. And it's an amazing performance from Pedro Pascal. It's probably Emmy worthy. This is probably the highlight that they would probably take, right, to show on a clip when he's nominated. But this does make Joel look a lot less hardened than I expected. Hannah, I was wondering, since you're new to this, did you feel like this version or this scene with Joel and how he was breaking down in front of Tommy, do you think this was consistent with how he was established earlier this season?
Well, let's backtrack to where he actually sees Tommy for the first time again. I mean, to me, him yelling Tommy was like, all of a sudden my eyes, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like crying from him hearing him say his name, because we haven't seen Tommy since episode 1, right? And then the entire time you're like, what happened to him? Is he alive? Oh my gosh. I was like, I felt my face getting hot, and like all of a sudden all these like tears. I was like, what is happening? So great setup. Great setup for the episode already there. And then I think it was, I think Mike, you bring up like a great point that like Joel obviously seemed like very much more emotional and less hardened than in the previous episodes. But I think how I felt was he and Tommy obviously have like a largely emotional connection, right? They're related. And not only that, like Tommy was there in the beginning, or like when all of this happened and like Sarah was killed, right? So I think how I felt was like he doesn't really need to hide anything from him. Like if there's anyone in the world that he can be like fully transparent with, like emotionally, it's Tommy. So I think like that was also a reason why I felt like, I don't know, like a huge sense of relief when he found him, because it's like his one connection to whatever was left in the past, right? Like, yeah, so I don't know. That all of that, like the relationship building, and again, Tommy has not been a developed character, right? Like we only see him in the beginning. We see him as like it's like a delinquent, like he is always bailing him out of trouble, things like that. It's like you only know like very small details about him. But I don't know if it's just like they're just both great actors, but yeah, I could already feel like the relationship that they had with each other was so strong. And I think they did such a good job with those like conversations that they had. Like, I mean, it's been a while since I watched that episode, but I can already feel my face getting on the podcast.
Dang, those feels.
Yeah.
My previous exposure to I've only seen Gabriel Luna in one other thing, and that was Terminator Dark Fate. And so
He really was one of the best things about that movie, by the way. But that's yeah. That's
I
another
mean,
conversation. Yeah.
I don't know, man. That movie was not that great. Oh, I didn't like
The
it.
movie
Okay,
really
actually,
wasn't that great. I agree with that.
yeah. So when they announced that he was playing Tommy, I was like, oh, nah, I don't know about that. But then, yeah, I mean, this episode just blew me away. Like I liked him already immediately in episode 1, and then this one, when he's going off of Joel, like it's just what a powerful, yeah, really powerful scene from not just Pedro Pascal but also Gabriel Luna. I guess for the rest of you who've played the game, do you like this version of Joel? Was it a little bit jarring to see him like break down crying?
No, I think it's a TV show, and you have to make your characters feel more human. And I think it was a good moment of vulnerability, that it's really weird. You don't know what you're missing until someone shows it to you. I realized that that was an aspect that in this instance I liked more than maybe the video game version of Joel, because it's very apparent that his really struggling, and when you struggle, you're not stoic all the time. You're going to have moments where you're either by yourself or you're with someone you could trust, and that part comes out. And I think it sort of, solidifies kind of where Joel might take this if he gets to be closer with Ellie. And like you said earlier too, absolutely riveting scene. Um, Pedro really just knocks the scene out of the park with his acting chops.
I heard that he would when it was the camera was on Gabriel Luna during his coverage, Pedro Pascal was still like break down crying to give that to Gabriel Luna to perform off of. And I thought like that's just like a great behind the scenes like trivia. That's like, oh, that's amazing.
Hey man, that's why he's daddy, dude.
He is daddy.
Yeah, I really like the sequence too, and I don't think it was jarring from the game because you spend a lot more time playing as Joel in the game, but when you're playing as Joel, it's not, the sequences aren't so that you can explore his inner monologue, see what he's feeling, like understand like what he's going through. It's to get from point A to point B and to kill infected. Like that's majority, because it's a video game. Like that's that's a central conceit of what makes a video game exciting. It has to be some sort of agency and like excitement and action, especially for this genre. So I never would have had like the expectation of be like, oh, like I want to know what he's feeling, every single time. And I know that's not what you're saying either, Mike. So I think to come to this part in his journey, I think it makes sense for him to say what he says. It is a little bit different from the game, because in the game he wants to essentially pawn off Ellie to Tommy, because he's like, oh, you're better equipped to take her to the Fireflies. Whereas here he's like, oh, I'm getting old, I'm getting weak, like I don't know if I can do this anymore. So there is a big shift, and it's really hard to talk about this without spoiling the second game, but I won't spoil the second game. But one of the biggest things that fans are divided on in the second game is kind of like the character of Joel, or like his motivations. And I feel like the setup for what they're doing here in the first season is to kind of like make it a little bit more well established, like this is why Joel thinks the way that he does, so that when the events of the second game unfold, people, I feel like this is their way of kind of like fronting the problem and being like, this is how we're addressing it. But yeah, I mean, like you guys said, I think both of them were really good. I've never seen Gabriel Luna in anything, so I thought he was great here. It was really nice seeing him again. And yeah, I just feel like that scene was very much earned in this episode.
Yeah, I won't add too much more to this because everyone said really great points, but I do feel like the Joel of this version, or of this series, is a different kind of Joel. I think he was already really emotional, like earlier on in the series, in the previous episodes, and so I didn't feel like it was as jarring, because we've seen moments where he's a lot more connected to his emotions than the one in the game. I mean, his connection with Tess in this series was way more. There was much more there than in the game. In fact, in the game, I never got a sense that they were all that linked emotionally or romantically even. But in this one, there was definitely a lot of care that was very evident, and maybe they wrote it to Pedro in a way, maybe because he's such a good actor and so good at portraying emotions like this. But I also think it was just a totally different approach. So, and I think Paul's right. It's to kind of link the second part, Last of Us, to this version a little more than the games did. So.
Yeah, all really good points. Yeah, you guys all make really good points. All right, let's talk about the Ellie and Maria scene. We get to see how Ellie learns about Sarah. This was not in the game either, and so they have a conversation about who Sarah was. And we also see how much Ellie cares about Joel, to the point where she defends him against anyone who speaks against Maria. Sorry, anyone who speaks against Joel. And she warns Ellie about the kind of man that Joel is, and what he what he did in the past. Even though Ellie doesn't know the specifics, she still defends him. Yeah. Any thoughts on this scene?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes to, it speaks to the bond that they have. And I mean, Neil and Craig have kind of talked about it in their podcasts, about how there's kind of like a duality of Joel is like a missing link in Joel's soul, essentially, is to have someone to protect. And then Ellie's missing link is kind of to have someone protect her, as we'll see in, the next episode. But I thought it was interesting. I mean, to be honest, for me, the most like shocking thing from that whole conversation was when Maria reveals that she's pregnant. And because that is, I mean, that's not like I wouldn't say that's like a huge part of, I mean, certainly it wasn't a huge part of this season overall, but she's not pregnant in the game. So so that made me very curious as to like what they were going to do with that storyline.
I think it ups the stakes for, the events of the second game, I guess, in some way. We'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see.
I did read, by the way, I didn't read the full article but they had sort of described that this second one might deviate probably more than the first one did for the upcoming seasons, or the second or third season.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have more thoughts on like deviations, but yeah, I'll say that for at the end when we kind of talk about the show holistically. Joel and Ellie, there's a scene where Joel basically talks to Ellie, and then we have that scene almost verbatim as the game. All of us who have played it know it very well. Hannah, did your face get warm during this scene?
I cried a lot during this episode, I think.
I think we need to do like we got to watch this show together somehow. Like I need to see these reactions from you.
I think I cried a lot. I think for me, because I've never played the game, there were so many things that were kind of like unexpected. Like I did not expect Joel to ask Tommy to take her. Like that did not even cross my mind. So the fact that in the game he tries to like pawn her off to Tommy is like so weird to me because of all the episodes leading up to this episode, right? Because I think naturally you realize that they're like really building up this bond that, you know, Joel and Ellie are supposed to like have, right? So like him trying to pawn her off in the game is kind of like out of character to me in a way. But I mean, I obviously didn't play the game, you know. So in the show, when he tries to get Tommy to take her because he's getting old, and you know, he says all these, I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. But I was really surprised, I think, still because of like the promise he made Tess. Like he kept saying like that's like one of the biggest like driving factors of like why he decided to like, you know, take Ellie all the way. And there's all these things. I was just like really, really shocked. But man, hats off to Bella Ramsey, because that's really when I felt like this girl is really good. You know, they're just all very kind of like emotionally charged, emotionally driven actors. And I think at that point I realized, okay, I know why they casted her, you know. And actually the second half of this season was when I really kind of saw her full acting chops, you know. Like I was actually really, really impressed. She's so young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just to speak to what you're saying a little bit, I mean, yeah, I agree, and I think it is on brand for video game Joel to pawn her off. Like it does make sense in the game, but I think the change that they made for the purposes of like the show, like changing that, was definitely better. And I remember one of the things that I thought of after that scene, because they have that big argument, and then the next day he's like, okay, I'm going to give you the choice, and you can come with me. And it's like, okay, yeah, we're going together. And I just remember like, man, that they made up fast. Like that's nothing like the game. And then I thought about the game. I was like, wait, no, they make up even faster in the game. It's literally like one horse ride, and then they're like, all right, you know what? We're ride or die together, you know. And I'm just like, okay.
Well,
Paul, you just echoed my thoughts on that whole, like in the video game, it's a lot more abrupt than how the show does it. And yeah, I think probably this show also fixes another thing that I thought that was kind of abrupt, was when I was playing the game. I remember I still remember it, having this thought, is that wow, he's not even gonna take a break in Jackson before like running off to Salt Lake, and it just doesn't make sense to me, like especially after all the traveling you've done. But in the show, they were sort of able to at least have that sort of break.
Mm-hmm.
In the game, it's Joel who has a change of heart, because that conversation, I think, opens up something that was previously, he tried to shut it off. And I think the moment she says Sarah's name, that kind of did something to Joel in the game version. So I think that's how I understand the game version. Obviously in this version it's different, and you know, I think both are legitimate. I actually accept both. I mean, I'll never speak bad on the holy game. That is The Last of Us Part One. But yeah, I can see what you guys are saying. It does make a lot of sense for the show and how the show sets things up. So this version, I think I kind of like in the morning where he's like, I'm going to give you a choice, and then of course she's going to pick him. I think he kind of already knows that, right?
Yeah.
Like they're going to have a hard time separating from each other because they deep down inside. I think what I love about the show and also about the game is how they write the characters, right? They never explicitly say their feelings, how they feel about each other. They don't ever say, I love you or I care about you. They say it in all these other ways or in these moments. And that's what I appreciate about it. It's like, if we think about the Star Wars prequels, for example, bastions of screenwriting where, Anakin and Padme, for example, like the way they talk to each other is just like, no one, maybe except for my wife and I, that's how we talk to each other. But, outside of this, I don't know anyone who
You guys talk
like,
about sand, Mike?
I do actually, when we have our camera equipment at the beach. But
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did think of Star Wars when you were going off about that. When I think I'm the least educated about Star Wars here, but I do remember Padme saying something like, "You're breaking my heart" or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Famous words.
it's pretty goated.
I was riveted during that scene. Okay, enough about Star Wars.
We always got to bring it up. I mean, the name of this podcast is, it's from Star Wars. All right, let's move on to the University of Eastern Colorado, a fake university. But they get to the campus, and we have a little montage of Ellie just bombarding Joel with a bunch of questions about the world before the pandemic. And I just thought there were so many funny moments, something that wasn't in the game. They're talking about contractors and how a contractor, she's like, wow, they sound so cool. He's like, yeah, they were cool. Like, hilarious. But then also like Ellie trying to understand football, which is from the game. Like, it's just like a bizarre concept. Like, okay, so, you advance the ball and then it resets or something. Like, yeah. So some good moments. We get to University of Eastern Colorado, and I personally was pretty disappointed that this sequence was so short. In the game, there was more of a buildup to them discovering the lab, and that was abandoned, and you kind of discover clues on what happened. But they were infected there. There was like, them trying to figure out what was going on. Hannah, since you're new to this, did you feel this sequence was rushed or too short, or did you feel like it was fine?
So in the game, they were attacked by infected.
Yeah, to like get through to a certain part of the campus, they were infected there, so you have to like kind of evade the infected.
Got it. In the show, when they get there, it's already been like abandoned. Right.
Yeah, there's like nothing there. There's just monkeys.
Yeah. And your assumption is that there were either like raiders or whatnot, I think. Yeah, I was like pretty perplexed because there were monkeys, which was really random and weird. And this is towards the end of the episode, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Now that it's coming back to me. Yeah, I felt like it was pretty rushed. I mean, we can talk about the ending too, I guess, but it was just like so many random things happening at once. And then even what happened at the end, like they obviously talk about it in like the future or the episodes after. And we can talk about them, but I didn't like that. So yeah, I definitely think it was rushed. It wasn't great, but it did end on kind of like that. Oh my gosh, what happened?
Those of you who played the game, were you disappointed, or did you feel like it was fine for this medium?
I think so. At this point in the game, like we've already encountered like 6 bloaters. the big sex icon from episode 5. um, so at this point, it is kind of like, man, like they're skipping a lot of the infected scenes, and I get why. They want to be, I guess, economical with their time and also perhaps with their finances, because I'm sure it's very difficult to kind of script that stuff in. But yeah, I mean, there was a part of me where I was like I get it. I get why they would want to skip that stuff, but I mean, I'll touch up on this probably later near the end, when we wrap up. But yeah, this this was kind of like, it didn't bother me just yet, but I think down the line in the later episodes, I was like, all right, come on, man. But I think in the context of this one, like the most important thing is for them to find out that the fireflies aren't there. I think the game does a slightly better job of explaining like why there's monkeys. I think they were like running tests and stuff on them, and then you can listen to like a couple audio logs where basically they're saying like the whole thing is like they failed essentially, and they're relocating to another place. But yeah, this was all like pretty quick. So I think that stuff, yeah, I mean, definitely, I think probably could have added a little bit more time on that part. But what's important for me is that they nailed the ending of that episode, because he gets impaled in a different way. I get why they made that change too, because he in the game he falls off a ledge and like gets impaled by the like the bar or whatever, the metal bar, and that would just be insane if that happened in the show. So I think the way that they did it and how it naturally links to the next episode, I thought was great.
He kills only one guy from that group, and I'm like, what? He just kills one guy in the game? They like they take down like a dozen people.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
was like Ellie actually pitches in and starts shooting them also, which is like her first time
Yeah,
kind of using the gun. And because earlier in this in the montage of them going to the University of Colorado, we see him teaching her how to snipe, right? So she
right.
is getting gun training from Joel. I wish we kind of saw a little bit more. And in the Last of Us podcast, Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, they talk about how they don't want to, they kind of avoid action from the game because it's kind of boring watching sequences replicated from the game in live action. But I think action in movies and shows is exciting, and you could have easily made an exciting sequence out of this part. I feel like the show has gotten into a pattern where it shies away from action when it really doesn't need to. And maybe it's budgetary reasons, maybe it's scripting issues, because this is season 1, right? So maybe they have a tighter budget. I'm really hoping in the second season we get a lot more action than this. I think there could have been easily like 5 to 10 minute action scene here, but instead he's just one guy. But I will say this: they use this moment of him just murdering one person later on, so I think
Right.
it does somewhat redeem the fact that there wasn't a lot of killing in action.
Yeah.
But I still wish they massacred people.
No, so
Yeah.
that was like my biggest gripe, I think, about the second half of this season, because like everyone knows this is adapted from a video game. Like in the episodes to come that we're going to discuss, like it's very obvious which scenes are from the video game. At least I think, right? And in my mind, I was like, I could totally see myself playing this character in the video game. And I thought they did it really well. And I would like to hear later on if those are like very, very accurate, to like those scenes in the game. But yeah, I just thought that those choices were really odd, because I don't want to say that there was too much of a lull, but I just felt like they're taking like the beats are taking too long. I think that's kind of how I felt. And I mean, we're going to talk about episode 7, and yeah, like that's why if I think about all the episodes that were in the second half, I don't think the pacing was great.
Yeah.
let the record show that Hannah wanted more killing, more gunplay, and more deaths.
I mean, it's a video game. You just expect that stuff, right?
I think the records show that all of us want that, right? We're all bloodthirsty here on this Weekend Foolish podcast.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to episode 7 then. Episode 7 is called Left Behind. It's based on the Last of Us DLC of the same name, and this is where Ellie tries to take care of an injured Joel, and we have a flashback of Ellie before she was even bitten, and she's at the Fedra facility. All right, so let's start in the beginning. Like we have an injured Joel in the basement in an abandoned house, and she tries to nurse him back to health, and he's pretty vicious with her. He shoves her and tells her to go back to Tommy and Jackson. And I think in this version of Joel, I wasn't used to him seeing him cry. Like he was shedding tears because but I think it's fitting for this version because I think his worst fears are realized. He's failed Ellie. He's he's gonna die and she's gonna be all alone and he can't protect her. And so I think him shoving her away was a pretty powerful, impactful moment.
And just to add a little bit more context, because you said DLC earlier, Mike, for people who don't know, DLC stands for downloadable content. And that's usually like a bit of a extra chapter of a story that was not initially in the the initial game, and they added it after like about a year, and it was just like an extra side story. So, and the fact that they made this one whole episode, because I talked to some other people too, and they were like, this is my least favorite episode. So I think it's very tricky to add this section into the overall show because it doesn't contribute to the overall story of Joel and Ellie so much, but I think it is important to, show, like, highlight the background of Ellie, like where she came from, what's made her the way that she is today. And also I think it also just injected, some much needed levity in the show because, I mean, they get to have fun. They get to be teenagers. So I think it was a good break from some of the other crazy stuff that's happening.
Paul, those people that told you that they didn't like this episode, were they fans of the game or were they people that had never played the game before?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, they didn't play the game. So their complaint was kind of just like get to the good stuff, like I don't want to like have to go through this flashback scene or anything like that. So it was kind of like a pacing issue.
Yeah, no, I mean, same. And obviously I never played the game. My sister was actually the one that told me that this was like an added on after. But I didn't really have a huge problem with the content in the episode itself. I had a huge problem with the length of it. There were like so many, like, I don't want to say like dead beats, but that's kind of how it was. Like, I understand like they're trying to portray like they're kids at a mall, there's merry-go-round, all that stuff, arcade, whatever. But I think it was just way too long. And again, I haven't obviously like seen this or played through this or whatnot, but I'd be curious, like, if like even the script, like, like what they were saying to each other is, accurate to the game, or whatnot, because like I just didn't think the writing was very great. And I love that this actress, I forgot what her real name is, but Storm Reed. Yeah, I think she's great, but I just think that she wasn't utilized that well throughout the entire episode. So for me, really, it was like not just pacing, it was really the length. It was way too long.
Probably might be interesting though. This was Neil Druckmann's script entirely for this episode, so it probably, yeah. And again, mentioned something very interesting when you started talking about the series overall in the beginning of this podcast. But I think I would. Yeah, I don't want to get too much into how I think about the whole thing, but this episode was. I love the story, and I love the story with the DLC, but there was a. It was almost way too close to the DLC for it to be interesting in the sense that maybe something like episode 3 was interesting, or even some of the earlier episodes of the series that kind of got close to the game but sort of added something different, uh uh made it interesting. And it was just kind of like, I think for me, why I liked the episode, I didn't love it because it was almost too close to the game.
So I'm gonna say something counter to what has been said so far. I actually liked a lot of the added details to the game. I mean, there are things that they talk about that I don't think was covered in the DLC, which was the debate between Fedra and the Fireflies, right? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? And Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, they've said constantly in the podcast, there are no villains in The Last of Us. Everyone is a protagonist of their own story, and they believe what they're doing is right. And up until this point, all we've seen of Fedra is that they're authoritarian, they're oppressive, they're abusive in their power and how they rule the quarantine zones. I mean, the Boston QZ hangs people for trying to leave. Kansas City QZ went further, and the authorities were raping and killing its citizens. But here we see a version of the Boston QZ where they're trying to train and raise future leaders. And Captain Kwong, fellow Asian brother, he tells Ellie that she has what it takes to be a leader, and she just needs to follow the rules. Whereas that girl who punched her, or she got in a fight with, right, that girl is probably going to be cleaning sewers or something like that, or service detail or something like that. So I just thought it was interesting that even though things in the QZ have been bad that we've seen, there was hope within the QZ that the next generation would turn things around, and Kwong kind of presents that hope to Ellie. And they make a pretty good point, right? Without Fedra, the QZ would just be in complete chaos, right? And which is what we saw in Kansas City, right? Without a governing body, things will just end up like in anarchy, right? These are actually themes that they will touch upon even further in The Last of Us 2. But I feel like the world building in this episode allowed me to better understand Fedra and the Fireflies, because in the game they did not go into any like as much detail as this. So I
That's
kind
a
of
good point, Mike.
Yeah, I kind of appreciated it for that.
One thing I also wanted to add, also, this episode was, despite how I feel about it, like, it looks great. I love the once again, production design. Brought me back to the 90s, seeing all those stores, or early 2000s, and it was just kind of like, wow, it almost was like found a mall that was stuck in time, but they didn't. They just kind of did it all from scratch, so that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, they filmed that at a mall that was supposed to be like demolished, right? And then they shot some of the scenes in there. The mall was like supposed to be, in real life, the mall was like a 1-story mall, and they're like, no, malls have to be 2 stories. And so they had to like build it or something like that. But in the mall, I thought there were some pretty funny moments that I laughed out loud in. The Ellie calls the escalator electric stairs. That got a laugh out of me. My favorite thing was Mortal Kombat 2. I love that The Last of Us is on HBO, which is part of Warner Brothers, so they have a license to use Mortal MK2. And in the game, they actually play a made-up fighting game that is pretty much like a Mortal Kombat ripoff. But then in this one, it's great to see WB doing its thing, plugging their IP in other properties. All right. Any other thoughts on this mall sequence? I mean, I thought it was a cool overall, like just like the DLC, I thought it was a cool like origin story for Ellie, and we find out a lot more about who this Riley person is, her best friend, and that they have this emotional connection to each other.
I have a question. So I actually didn't play this DLC in the video game. Um, does Take on Me play in the background in the game?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The first
That's
time
awesome.
Take on Me happens is sometime later.
Sometime, some years later.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I think it was a great addition for reasons. So
Yeah, I think I totally understand like where everyone's like kind of has a couple of gripes with like the pacing on this issue. And yeah, like I can see that because there were moments where we wish we could have gotten something else. And it's, I mean, it's kind of like, well, we all watched the Oscars yesterday. So just to pull from that, it's like, instead of giving the time for people to finish their speeches, we had to watch them introduce the Little Mermaid trailer to us. And it's like, dude, like, come on, man, like make better use of your time, right?
It's
So I think
Disney. They're never gonna stop synergizing. Never.
yeah. So I mean, it's uh I think the DLC as a whole is great, but it's great because we got the meat and the bones of like everything in the original like first part of the game. So nothing was kind of left on the cutting room floor. But for this one, it's like obviously we talked about it a little bit earlier. Some action scenes that are actually quite pivotal to the story and also to Ellie's relationship with Joel. I mean, just to backtrack a little bit, like when Joel gets impaled in the previous episode and Ellie's like shooting all these people, and that part's like crazy because it's like, oh, she's helping you this time, and she says something like, oh, like when we get out of this, you better sing for me. And that's like a great line in the game, and obviously none of that happens in the show. So I do agree, like there are parts where it's like, okay, like they probably could have taken out the section where you know or I don't want to say take out like the merry-go-round section or anything, because that part is nice, but just like shorten some of that so that they could have spent more time on the other scenes. Like I can see why people weren't happy with that, but for me, I mean, I don't know, as a fan of the game, it's just hard to be objective about this kind of stuff. So
Well, what did that episode clock in at? It felt very, very long. Very long.
yeah, I don't know.
Was it
It's,
like over 60 minutes?
I want to say it was, yeah. I think that one was definitely a little bit longer. And I think, yeah, I also think part of the reason it's hard is because at this moment while this episode is playing that Joel is like dying. So a part of you just
Mhm.
wants to like cut back to Joel and be like, is this man gonna live? So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's 56 minutes, almost an
Oh,
hour.
Yeah.
okay.
It felt pretty long. And I think the other thing that I don't know, personally, I felt that they could have done a better job with was with the clicker or infected or whatever thing that attacks them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
Um,
infected.
yeah, the infected. I think they showed him way too early
Mm.
because, and I would be curious, like what the timestamp is on that versus like when they actually get like attacked, because I think the fact that the episode itself felt long, it made that from when they first show him to when they actually get attacked feel very, very long. Like it was almost to
Oh
the point
yeah.
where I was like, is this even gonna happen?
Yeah.
Like, because that's like the first like zombie like infected you've seen for a while, right?
Mm.
Since like the previous episode. So um but I don't know, Mike, are we gonna go on to like the rest of the episode? Because I have some other comments about.
Yeah. I mean, do you have any other comments about the mall sequence? Otherwise, we can just move on to the ending of the episode, which, like, in present day.
Oh, wait, does the mall sequence include how they get infected or they get bit?
Yeah. Right. So that
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was actually pretty crazy So at that point, I kind of felt like, okay, maybe this is the payoff, right? Because you kind of find out like what happened with Ellie and with Riley, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. But even then, I felt like, still too long. So in like that episode with what's it,
Bill and
Frank?
Frank.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Bill, where I was like, this feels so long, but then the payoff was, so good at the end. This did not exactly feel like that, but I did feel like, okay, like we had to know kind of this story to understand like Ellie better. And yeah, it just made me like really, really sad for her. And
Uh,
and obviously we were always curious, like as where she got bit or like how she figured out that she was like immune, right? So yeah.
I think that Bill and Frank episode, as great as the writing and performances and like how like affecting it was, I think that feels so out of place in the entirety of the season. Whereas this Left Behind episode at least is about Ellie, and it gives us necessary backstory to how she got infected, who she first really cared about. The Bill and Frank episode, just I don't know, it just I felt like it brought the narrative to a screeching halt, and we don't ever revisit those characters ever again. We don't talk about them again. So I don't know, like I think I feel a little bit more strongly on how this episode might have been more necessary, even though maybe it could have been shorter or the pacing could have been better, or maybe make the other episodes beefier, expand on other episodes and arcs so that this one just doesn't feel like it's taking up a necessary space in the show.
Yeah.
That could have been spent, doing other things.
Essentially, what we're asking for is every episode needs to be 2.5 hours, and there needs to be double the episode count.
Oh yeah, just give us more, man. I could take an entire episode of Joel and Ellie sitting by a campfire, and then the whole episode is just them talking, like before sunset, before sunrise. Like, just give us like the post-apocalyptic version of that, but father daughter, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing like this kind of world building and you're like building sets from like ground up, like use them. Like I'm still in shock that this series was only 9 episodes, right? I mean, like, yeah, the longest episode was what, like 90 minutes? Close to 90 minutes or
Yeah.
something?
Yeah, the first episode.
Yeah, it was first episode was 90 minutes, and then after that, every other one was what, close to 60 minutes? Was the finale 60 minutes also?
No, the
Oh.
finale is 43 minutes, the shortest
Okay, yeah.
episode.
See, that was very, very felt, that it was short, because I was going to say, I didn't think that was 60 minutes. Yeah, so
like, how do you give Bill and Frank 75 minutes, but you give the finale 43 minutes?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just come on, man.
I think for Bill and Frank's episode, it was more of a thematic build-up, like for the overall narrative of the show.
Sure,
Because
yeah. I mean, I agree, but it doesn't have narrative significance. You could have shown it another way or done
yeah,
a
I'm
little
with
bit
you on that.
faster. Yeah.
I think it kind of comes down to, well, how much are they going to change or not? I feel like the less they change, I don't know, like the fast. It's difficult. I really do feel like I'm trying to, and I lost my train of thought, but it's just, if, for me, I don't know if being familiar with some of the beats of the game hurt my experience of watching this series at times. I still think it's a really great series, but it may have messed with me in terms of like, this is not how fast or slow I expected certain things to go. But at the same time, it's trying to be itself. So this is kind of, I felt this more in the, these episodes in the second part, where it's kind of like, okay, I'm blurring my expectations for how I saw the game to work with how this show is going. And I would say like episodes like this kind of bugged me a little in that regard, and also the next two, to be honest. So
Yeah, I wonder kind of if it would have benefited from rearranging the episodes a little bit. Like, if they had put this one somewhere else versus like here. I mean, this is like you said it's like a DLC, right? So you don't necessarily have to have that scene in the beginning where Joel is like almost dying, right? I don't know.
So you do actually, because
Oh,
in the
okay.
DLC, like they link it
Mhm.
to the story in the first game when Ellie is dragging Joel on like a horse sled type thing
Mhm.
and like pulling him into the house. So that's how it's linked.
Oh, and then there's a flashback.
Yeah, yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe they could have done some like taken some like creative
Yeah, I
liberties and
mean,
maybe put this somewhere else. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, they already did take creative liberties with some other parts of the,
Mhm.
yeah. So I think it's totally valid.
All right. I just thought of something that solves this problem for HBO. All right. So I think all the executives should be listening to this podcast. Here we go. All right. So the Bill and Frank episode and Left Behind, you could have easily just taken these out of the show and fill in that time with actual things like Joel and Ellie stuff, or like things with the actual story. Let the show finish, make the finale an hour and a half long, and then maybe 5-6 months later, boom, just drop on HBO Max, Left Behind. Just like the DLC, later on we get this like story that's like not a part of the main story, but hey, it's like a DLC, it's like an additional chapter. Drop in Bill and Frank, but then let that expand on things that we saw in episode 3, right? They go to Bill and Frank's house and we're out there like, we don't know anything about Bill and Frank, right? But let that DLC kind of, or not, sorry, that episode, the standalone episode that they release after the show, fill in the gaps, so that it's not a part of the main show. It doesn't detract away, but it still is a part of the Last of Us experience.
Perfect. Hats
Hear
off to you,
that,
Mike.
executives?
Yeah.
Did I get the TV Junkies approval?
Copyright Mike Tang.
Hire this man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I
I
do
think
feel
that would have
like-
been perfect.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No, go
I was
ahead,
going to say, I do feel like these two episodes that you're talking about, if they were released kind of as standalones, it would have been great. But I do feel like Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann really loved these stories, and it was almost like it's almost like they're passion projects within the game. They're
Yeah.
remaking the game. They're remaking the story, of course, but these were like the stories they really wanted to tell. And I guess this is just a case of like artists really wanting something to be part of something, even if it is almost at the expense of the greater whole, which I think we're all in agreement of. It kind of makes the pacing really strange. But I especially listening to the Last of Us podcast, they are like so proud of these ones, and for good reason. But it does kind of make. I remember like we talked about the Frank and Bill one as like a great story, but not a great Last of Us episode almost. So
It's kind of like The Last Jedi it's like we've talked about this before.
oh, here we go.
Don't do this, Mike.
our scheduled last. Go.
Last Jedi is a great standalone Star Wars story, but as a part of the Skywalker saga, it kind of feels out of place. All right,
Here's
Whoa.
I want to offer another. I want to
Release it as a DLC.
I want to offer another perspective of this. I think episode 3 was so good for me. Like I was kind of waiting to see if they could surprise us again with something like it that kind of expanded on part of the game later on. That I felt like that moment never came, so I feel like I'm left hanging a little.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's really I'm completely with Job. Like I think Neil and Craig just like they love those two stories a lot, and I think it's clear that they love it more than the general audience loves it. But I think it's one of those situations where they just really wanted to tell those stories, probably more than the actual game, and it's up to us to just have to, to live with that. But I mean, for me, it's like I still thought both of the episodes, I mean, regardless, they could have switched some things, but yeah, I enjoyed what they did with it.
Yeah, neither of these episodes tank the show for me, but yeah, I think maybe one can wonder like if things could be reworked for the benefit of the entire show while still keeping those elements that they love so much. Just before we wrap up on this episode, I just kind of want to mention at the end, Ellie chooses to stay and help Joel despite him shoving her away. And I just love that shot of them holding hands. Like she just grabs his hands and to let him know that she's not going to leave him. And that was a very tender-hearted moment. I teared up during that little scene, and how it's intercut with her and Riley. It's like, oh, she's found another person that she cares so much about, that she loves. And yeah, just a really great moment. All right, let's move on to episode 8. This guy right here. All right, this stud muffin. All right.
Yes.
This is where Ellie gets hunted by a group in a snowy town while Joel is still recuperating. All right, so we start with Ellie hunting for food, and she meets David and James, who are part of a group of survivors living at a snow resort. And this is a religious group, which we haven't encountered yet in this show. In the game, this group was not religious. I kind of want to comment on this, or just ask you all how you feel about it. Like, was it really necessary to show this group as being not just religious, but like being specifically Christian?
Yeah.
Like, and they're all white people, and going back to the episode in Jackson, that is it's a commune, communist town that works, and then everything else is, a complete disaster, including this group right here. I'm just wondering, like, why this group had to be religious at all, or at least, why did it have to be a religion, a real religion? In the second game, we encounter a religious group, and it's a completely made up like religion.
Yeah.
So I want to know your thoughts on this.
This is what I wanted to ask Hannah. I wanted to ask Hannah, how many frames did it take for this show for her to realize that David was the bad guy? Because knowing your knowledge of how Hollywood likes to treat Christians, especially white Christians, how many frames did it take of him reciting scripture where you're like, this guy's the bad guy?
No, I immediately, like when they were reciting and he was like leading them, I was like, pedophile. Immediately, I said, he's a pedophile. And I was like, when are they going to reveal he's a pedophile? Like throughout the entire episode.
Oh, wow.
And you can ask my husband. I was watching. I was like, he's straight up a pedophile. And he's like, are you sure? And I was like, yes. But it's not even because of my knowledge of Hollywood. Like I watch a lot of like true crime. Like a lot of the trash shows I watch are like FBI, true crime, like those kind of shows. And every time they show like some sort of like religious sect or like, something with God or like Christian, it's always pedophile, cult, like sacrificing humans, whatever. So I was like, okay, this is like a very common, again, like Hollywood trope kind of white man. Like, yeah. So yeah, honestly, immediately I knew that this guy was going to be a bad guy and he's a pedophile.
Yeah. Oh.
Wow, spot on. I didn't know he was a pedophile until he started taking off his pants. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I don't know. How did you all feel about, I guess, them bringing in Christianity and religion into this group that wasn't religious in the game?
I guess I'll just say a little bit. I think just from like a storytelling perspective and kind of like what I was telling Hannah, it's like, you couldn't have been any more like overt with like your message here, because one of the pivotal moments in the game is when you find out that David is like the guy that like whose men you've been killing, and that's like a shock in the game. But then the moment you see him reading scripture, like this guy, of course this guy's gonna have conflict with Ellie, you know. And I feel like that sucked away like all the tension. So I don't know how like Joe, Albert, how you guys felt, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. Sorry, Job, go on.
No, no, no. I want to hear what you're curious about.
No. Job, go, and then I'll pose the question.
Oh no, I was just kind of agreeing. Like, I don't know. I don't know. It felt like such a cop out and such lazy writing to bring in a religion that is unpopular in the greater culture currently. It is very on the nose. There's like white Christian nationalism that's kind of front and center right now, especially over the last few years. And you know, we were talking about how like the communism thing in that last episode was really overt and on the nose. This is like even more on the nose, and I felt like you couldn't have picked a more lazy avenue to expand, and I'm doing like finger quotes, expand on like the the world building of this group of people. I don't know, like it kind of, it's not even almost like, I'm not offended almost by like the Christian element of it. I'm just more offended that it's like the laziest possible direction you could go. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
yeah,
go
sorry,
ahead, Mike.
sorry. Yeah, so Albert, I am curious about your take because I mean, just for context, all of us here are Christian, and Albert, you're not a Christian. I was wondering, yeah, your take on this. Like, what's your perspective?
I agree in this to a point that it is pretty lazy writing. I don't know if it bothered me that much because I'll be really frank, I'm not a Christian, so I don't you know, so I there is something about that perspective that I get, but only to a point. Because I think, and I'm not trying to get personal here, but I kind of grew up being bullied a lot by Christians, I hate to say, because I was a Buddhist in a school that didn't have a lot of Asians at the time too. So that kind of compounded the issue. So I've kind of, you know, I've seen sort of like the other side of it, but I don't think it's a specifically Christian thing. It is I think whenever people are a majority in a community, that doesn't matter what the belief system is or non-belief system is, or political system is, there's gonna be, you know, an element of power that that majority has over people who are the minority, right? So this isn't really specifically about one thing in my mind. It's lazy to a point where, yes, I see what you guys are talking about regarding the you know, the white Christian guy is the bad guy trope, because it's been, yeah, I agree, it's been sort of overplayed a lot. It's kind of like, well, why couldn't they have, you know, done something else? Maybe it's less believable if they chose another religion given where they are, but yeah, there's plenty of cults out there too that we can draw from, and I think, you know, like I was going back to it, Craig Mazin was pretty front and center about how he felt about theocracies, and he really wanted to sort of make a point about it. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I felt about the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, like I think you mentioned it. You know, it does make sense with the region of America that they're in, that they would be Christian. Also, I mean, if this group was Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu, it would be immediately labeled as culturally insensitive or like even racist. And I feel like you can't really depict any other religion in a bad light in Western films other than Christianity. And I think it
Well,
kind
I
of makes
mean,
sense.
to your
Sorry.
point, I think like if they were going to go that route, they should have made it a sort of more off, you know, more extreme version of Christianity, because, you know, we do know those sort of societies do exist.
Yeah,
here
for
in the
sure.
United States. And I think because there was nothing to, they didn't really seem to define what made him use religion in a particular way that was more, someone who's in charge of a goodness, I'm thinking of incident that happened like 30 years ago, but I can't remember the name right now. But the compound the FBI raided and stuff like that. But there's a very sort of specific perversion of religion that has to occur for someone to sort of you know have that much power over a small group of people. And I don't think, probably the lazy part was they didn't really quite push things to that point
Mhm.
or define what that element could have been.
Yeah, I really appreciate your thoughts, Albert. And there is definitely an element to like the power dynamic of religion, and someone who like is a little more, who can act a little more well read and act a little more like that they know what they're talking about, can certainly weaponize things. And yeah, in human nature, right? Like especially humanity under duress, like we're seeing in this post-apocalyptic world, all of the tendencies would be even more heightened and even more exaggerated. And so perhaps in a way, I mean, you're changing my mind as we talk, which is great. Like I think there is actually something really like profound and interesting about the way they've kind of approached this, you know.
I think like I agree with Job in a sense where I think that this is pretty realistic. I think like this can totally happen, in a post-apocalyptic society. But I also think that what um was, and I'm not going to say like, oh, I feel like it was, tired or it's been used many times. Um it has, because like all the, like the TV shows I watch, they do use it. But I do think they use it for a reason, right? Because it is really out there. Like that's like kind of like the reality. Um, but yeah, I think my question walking into this episode actually was this how it was in the game? And yeah, and I mean, and the fact that in the game it wasn't like this, but in the writing, like the show, they decided to make it this way, was obviously a choice that
Mhm.
they made, right? So I think that is very interesting. Maybe you could even say that it was like a risky move on their part because it could be pretty divisive. But at the end of the day, like when I was watching it, honestly, like I think because I knew he was like a pedophile from the beginning, you know, and like I like
That's pretty
suspected
good, by the way. In the video game, it's actually, in my opinion, the video game it felt a little more obvious because the guy sounded a little more creepier. Whereas in this
Oh,
one, it
really?
doesn't start out that way.
His
Yeah.
voice is kind
Yeah.
of like this.
Oh.
Oh my gosh. No, she just didn't look like he could be trusted. And then I was like, they're definitely eating human meat right now.
Oh.
Like all of these things, I was like, it has to be. Like this show is almost ending. There's gonna be like wild stuff going on. And I was like, it has to like tee up to these things. So I didn't really think of it, think anything else after that, because I was like, I'm a Christian, but I definitely don't align with this guy or this
Yeah.
group. So it didn't really bother me at all.
I think that I did see some articles, or sorry, some comments about how people were saying like they're arguing for the sense that like David is not Christian. The fact that is that this episode is meant to highlight that he is a deeply manipulative person, and that he uses whatever he can do to get his way, and obviously religion is one of those things. And I don't think anyone in this group is denying the fact that Christianity, along with many other religions, can have power structures that enable this kind of abuse. Obviously, our stances are different, where whether or not we think these power structures that enable abuse are inherently bound to the religion itself. And of course, that's just another debate of literally what we believe in. But I think, like, for the purpose of this show, yeah, like I just feel like you can establish that David is a manipulative person without having to incorporate the whole religious thing. And for me, it's not even because it's like, oh, like I'm a Christian, so I'm offended by, you know, leftist liberal media stuff. Like at the end of the day, like most of the people who are creating this kind of content is liberal, and they're free to voice and show, like, express their art. And I know for a fact that, like, you know, for the most part, they're not going to portray Christians in a good light. I mean, I think my hang up, which is I think what the rest of you guys have hang-ups with, is just that the fact that you reveal him as like a religious guy from the very beginning sucks away all of the mystery and the tension. Like, of course this guy's the bad guy. Like from the get-go, you know he's the bad guy. And yeah, like just bringing back to my point, like in the game, you can kind of tell something's off with him. But like even for me, like in the game, I was like, I didn't know he was a pedophile. I didn't know he was eating people, you know, stuff like that. Like you gradually kind of figure that out in the game. And a lot of that, you know, credit to Nolan North, the voice actor of David, who's anyone who plays video games knows who he is because his voice is in like hundreds of video games. Like definitely his pedophilic nature is not as overt in the game. He just sounds really creepy. But in the show, I think she says something, or David says something when he's fighting Ellie in the end, something about like the fighting is the part that I enjoy most, right? Or something like that, when he's like pinning her down. And that part is like a deeply unsettling line of dialogue where it's like, freak, dude, this guy is like so much scarier.
And when he starts taking
before. Yeah.
And when he starts taking his pants off.
And the building is like burning around him.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, what are you doing?
All right, that didn't happen in the game. That line,
Sorry, go ahead.
and him taking his pants off, that was not in the game. And I think seeing it in live action is so much more terrifying. I'm like, like just horrified.
Oh my gosh, I wasn't terrified. I thought he was an idiot. Like, I'm like, the building is burning around you. What are you doing? Like, okay, well, I mean, I think we'll get to that scene, but there were a lot of things that were like really weird about this episode in general, in terms of like the world building. So it's like, I enjoyed the world building in the other episodes. This one was really bizarre. And maybe it was just because the whole town is really weird and there's a lot of weird things going on, but yeah, it was really weird.
I gotta say though, shout out to the guy who plays David, because he literally does look like he could be my youth pastor. Like he could literally, like his voice and the way that he looks, I'm like, all right, I can see you preaching on Sunday.
Dude, halfway, for like half of the episode, I thought he was the guy from The Good Place. I don't know if you guys watched that show, but there's like another white guy in there that looks exactly like him.
Yeah.
Sorry, really racist, but for the longest time, I thought it was him.
That's funny.
Albert, what were you gonna say?
No, it's kind of interesting. In the game, you could hear people in the background running away because there's obviously a community, but that wasn't too apparent in this version, I thought.
Okay, so that is my biggest hang up with this episode. That's my biggest complaint. The fact that Joel doesn't, like, okay, apart from that really brutal interrogation scene, which was like 10 out of 10, like aligns with the game perfectly well. But after that, there's a whole section where Joel essentially goes on a rampage and like murders a bunch of people in the town to get to Ellie. And for me, my hang up was like, where did all of those people go when David decided to have a one-on-one prayer meeting session with Ellie? Like, did they all just be like, oh, okay, like they're gonna hang out, so we're all just gonna like go to the lake or something? Like they all disappeared.
That was exactly the problem I had. I was like, aren't there other people living here?
Yeah.
Like, how is this building on fire and no one is coming to see?
Yeah.
You know, and that was the building that they were eating in previously,
exactly.
right? Like they were
Yeah.
in there. Yeah, that was so bizarre.
Something I did wish that they would do was, you know, probably maybe highlight this. I'm going to say that, but focus more on the people who were in the town, and you can tell even in the beginning of the episode, they're starting to realize, you know, not everything is right, and I think that probably would have, you know, back to your earlier points, sort of maybe not it would have differentiated him as not, being a Christian in the way that they are. He's using it to like manipulate them. But I thought that was sort of a blown opportunity too, because it sort of robbed us of a chance to. I mean, I don't know what happened to that lady and her daughter. I felt like they were gonna sort of like pull on that thread just a tiny bit more, but they didn't. So
I did like that moment though when he like slaps the daughter for demanding that Joel gets justice, or Joel and Ellie should both die because of what happened to her father, which I thought was a really great link to to episode 6. But and I so right when he slapped her, I'm like, okay, so this is a cult. This is not just like any normal Christian establishment. So I did appreciate that. Like you said, Albert, I wish they kind of played it up even more about how like twisted this guy is, and how this guy has this entire community as his pawns.
Wait, Mike, speaking of that scene where you find out that the people that attacked Ellie and Joel are from this town, right? Like, my assumption in episode 6 or whatnot was that they were raiders and they were, trying to like kill them so they can take their stuff. But in this episode, they make it sound like Joel and Ellie were the ones that were, I forget, but like there was a lot of confusion. Like my husband and I were discussing this during the episode, and we were like, no, they're the bad guys, not Joel and Ellie. You know what I mean? Because Joel and Ellie were trying to run away, right? So what is the deal here? Like it just seemed like the people in the community were like severely misled about what the people going out were doing, basically.
Yeah, I think the way I see it is they were looking for food because their community is starving, and they see the horse at the university, and they're just looking around. I think maybe Joel and Ellie interpreted them as being raiders, so there's that like standoff. So I think maybe it was based on misinterpretation from Joel and Ellie, and from both sides, which led to the death of Alec, the guy's name. May he rest in peace.
Yeah, in the context of the game, you kill a lot more of David's people at the university when you find out that all the Fireflies are gone. So you're killing all of those people, and then that's why there's more of a reason for David to be like we want you guys dead, as opposed to like the one guy that they killed when they were trying to run away in the show. So I think the game is a little stronger here. It adds a little bit more context.
Yeah, I just want to talk. We already mentioned Joel's map interrogation, but I cheered and clapped when we see the setup. The guy tied up to the chair, and then another guy tied up against the piano in the back. I'm like, yes, we're getting it. They gave it to us. I have a friend who loves The Last of Us, and we text each other after every episode. And we kept talking about how if they leave this scene out, this show sucks. And I was so relieved that they left it in. It was like beat for beat, exactly the same, stabbing him in the knee, threatening him to pop off his knee with the knife. I'm like, oh, beautiful,
Yeah.
so good.
So
and then what Joel says, right? He's like, the guy's like, dude, I'm not gonna tell you, man. And he's like, it's okay, I believe him. And he just kills the guy. It's so good. It's just like, this is the Joel that has been hinted at when he tells Ellie that he has done bad things, or when Maria even says that he's done bad things. You see, he has like this look. Pedro Pascal has this look that we didn't see in the game, which was like he kind of enjoys it, like the violence of this. And so yeah, I really am glad that they did it justice.
If only he had just killed a couple more people after that, I think it would have been.
Well, yeah. You got to kill these cultists, man. Like, you can't.
Yeah. This was the scene, like, because they skipped that violence, this was the scene where I was like, I don't know if Joel's gonna shoot up the hospital in the finale, because I was like, they are really skipping every single action beat in the show. So it did make me a little scared.
I have,
yeah,
dude. Even then, man, I have things to say about the hospital scene. But yeah, sorry. Albert, go on.
No, I'll save it for the hospital when we talk about the next.
All right.
I just wanted to say one more thing. Shout out to Troy Baker, of course, who plays Buddy Boy, aka James. I was so sure. For those of you who don't know, Troy Baker, the guy who gets butcher knifed in the neck, he plays Joel in the video games. But I was so sure he was going to play David, and I'm so glad he didn't play David, because that's not something you want on your resume for as big of a voice actor as you are, dude.
He would have been on Mike's background.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
Oh, are we? If we're about to move on to the next episode, I want to just shout out to Bella Ramsey again. I've been a little hard on her for not being the same Ellie, but she's killed it all the way to this point, and the very end.
Yep.
When she finally gets the better of David, like, there's such an emotional release that is it like heightened the rating of this episode in my head a few extra points because of that last moment where she just is like letting all of the trauma, all of it out, and she's just wailing on what's
the
left
payoff
of
was
David's
huge.
face.
Yeah, he's clearly dead, and she just keeps butchering him.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Albert.
No, I was gonna say she's really good at sort of making Ellie like this badass, tough person. But there are moments in her performance where you could feel that she's very, very vulnerable. There are things that can still really, really affect her deeply. I think the first one that I noticed in her performance was when I think Sam died, and she lets out this yell, and it's almost like a real yell fear. I was like, oh, oof, that's quite an interesting performance.
Yeah, I think the ending makes up for some of the gripes that I had with the episode. Like the baby girl line is what wrecked me in the game, and I think they replicated it really well in the show. The only difference is obviously that happens in the game when they're still both in the burning building, but contextually it makes more sense for her to kind of like leave on her own. But yeah, I mean, Bella Ramsey, like you guys said, this scene was so good, and she killed it, just like she killed David.
Wait, is that scene, where they're like she throws the thing, sets the building on fire, she's like crawling on the ground. Is that in the game?
Yeah, that's the boss. That's like a boss fight, basically.
Yeah.
The
okay, that
place
felt
is on fire.
exactly like it.
Yeah.
I was like, this is the level in a video game, but I thought it was like really, really well done. Whereas when that bloater came out in that other episode, I was like, oh, this is a video game.
Bloater.
Like, I was like, this is so obvious. But here, I think it was just like how it was played out was really nice, and I could put myself into the game, like trying to navigate like that level and like kill people and stuff.
This was my least favorite level in the entire game, and I was stuck on this one for the longest time.
David killed me so many times, dude.
But it's like horrifying. It's like a horrifying way to die in this level. And
fleeing a pedophile is probably like the scariest thing.
Yeah.
It's like worse than a bloater.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, especially now that the bloater is a sex icon.
Why isn't that in one of our backgrounds? Well,
yeah, that's true.
Hannah, change it, please.
I actually tried for my faceless. I actually tried that as a wallpaper. I even downloaded it. It just didn't work, and that's
do it, Albert.
Yeah.
No, but that line at the end where Joel says "baby girl," oh my freaking wrecked me.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, one gripe that I had was in the very first episode when he puts Sarah to bed, he kisses her on the head, but he doesn't say anything. In the game, he says, "Good night, baby girl." And that's the first time you hear him say it. And then obviously when she dies, he calls her baby girl again. So I was just like, oh, you needed to say kiss her goodnight and say baby. Don't say it in duress. Just like that's just what you call her, you know. But anyways, minor gripe.
Yeah, minor gripe out of all the things
I
I
was
gripe about mine.
okay, because he didn't say it in that opening scene. I was scared that he wouldn't say it in this moment. I thought he was
Oh
gonna.
no, there was no
Oh,
way, dude. There's no way they're gonna cut that out, dude.
Yeah. Well, hey,
You
know,
never
man,
know. You never know.
yeah, he did. They cut out all this freaking murder and massacre. I mean,
Yeah, you don't get to they don't kill nearly as many people, so you never know. They might
Yeah.
move that element.
We don't have time for baby girl. Let's move
yeah.
on.
I mean, they didn't have time for baby girl in the opening scene.
They had to cut the 2 seconds when
Yeah,
you know,
that's great.
2
All right,
seconds
let's
of
move on.
runtime.
Let's move on to the last episode. Look for the light. Joel and Ellie reach the fireflies, and ooh, we got to talk about this opening scene, man. Oh,
Oh heck
All
yeah.
right.
Oh, yes.
This woman, a pregnant woman, is being chased by an infected and gives birth to a baby. And we find out this woman's name is Anna and the baby's name is Ellie. And the moment you see her, it's Ashley Johnson, who plays Ellie in the game. And the moment she spoke her first lines, I just gasped. I'm like, it's just so amazing to hear the original voice of Ellie. And Paul, you know, you said in our previous Last of Us episode that you were thinking about the character of Ellie and then you were picturing Bella Ramsey in your mind. I think even now, even at the end of the show, by the last episode, I don't think I will ever not think about Ashley Johnson as Ellie. And as much as I do love and appreciate this adaptation of The Last of Us, I love what Pedro and Bella bring to these roles, these characters. It's a dream come true to have this world and everything brought to life, but you know, in the end, it's still an adaptation. And I think it just confirms to me that game Ellie, Ashley Johnson, is forever Ellie to me. And I think the moment she spoke her first lines, I'm just like, oh, it just brought back everything from the game. And I thought it was just perfect casting to make her Anna, Ellie's mother. This is a character that Hannah. So this is a character that it's only alluded to in minor details in the game, and like a note that you pick up that you find out that Ellie's mom's name is Anna. So we never get to see her until now, and this is where the show is such a good complement to the game. And now we have an expansion of who this character was. I don't know. So, first question to you guys: Do you? Well, for Paul, do you still feel the same way now that the show has reached its final episode? That you still think of Bella Ramsey as Ellie, or did this change anything? Hearing Ashley Johnson speak in this show.
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously, like when I think of Ellie, it's not just Bella Ramsey, but it's just, you know, because we've been watching the show, it's been with us for the past, you know, 9 weeks. It's impossible for me to only think about like just one of the characters, you know. Ellie, to me, also will always forever be Ashley Johnson first. But I think because Bella Ramsey has proven herself to be more than capable of embodying the spirit of Ellie, it's easy for me to picture both of them. And I think seeing, you know, hearing her voice, hearing her do all the grunts and stuff, it's like the multiverse is opening up, because it's like, oh shoot, there's 2 Ellies in this show right now, which just makes it so perfect that she is the mother. And another thing that many people have been saying about this so far is that Ashley Johnson looks a lot like Bella Ramsey. They got very similar facial characteristics. So I think it's perfect that they cast Bella Ramsey. Like, I'm sure that's not why they casted her, but because she looks like Ashley. But I just think that that's a nice coincidence.
Well, Ashley Johnson played Ellie, what, 10 years ago? Or did the voice
Yeah,
like a long time ago, right?
But she
Well,
also does the voice of Ellie in Last of Us 2, which came out in 2020. So
Oh, I see. So
yeah.
a few years ago. Okay. Yeah,
So-
it was so trippy because
yeah.
sorry to cut you off, Paul, but I had no idea she was the voice actor for Ellie. So yeah, like as soon as the words came out of her mouth, I was like, oh my gosh, Like it was like almost jarring because I was like, she sounds like Ellie for some reason. Yeah, and I was like, this is crazy. And then I actually like Googled her and I realized that she was the voice actor. Yeah, great casting choice to do that, honestly. It was genius.
Okay, at what point did you realize, or those of you who played the game, at what point did you realize that this character was Anna and then she was pregnant with Ellie?
So this is what Job and I were talking about when we had we were chatting with you last time, Mike. So I wish that they had hidden this, but they released news and articles saying that Ashley Johnson plays Anna. And so for those of us who know who Anna is, we'd be like, I found out about that. I was like, oh shoot, like I wish I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, so it was a surprise for me.
Yeah,
it
that's
was
why
posted on all the official social media platforms too.
Yeah, so that's why I was like really close to telling you that last time we hung out. I was like, no, he has to. If he doesn't know, he doesn't know.
I'm glad you went in pure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was. I had goosebumps like when I realized like who this character was. I was like, oh, this is so brilliant.
Yeah.
And, she literally gave birth to. I mean, literally and figuratively. It's just like intense, like whatever they created here.
And also just like the passing of the switchblade, like because that is also another thing that we didn't know where she got the switchblade from in the game. So that was another great detail.
Okay, and here is what I love the most about the sequence. There's so much I love about it, but I think that what I love the most is she tells Marlene that she cut the cord before she got bit. And Ellie's life begins with a lie. And Marlene, I don't know if she believes her or not, but I just love that. And because the entire show, the first game ends with a lie. And I think it's so complex, and there's so much to kind of unpack and think about when it comes to that.
Well, I mean, they would have been screwed, right? If they took Ellie and actually she got bit after she hadn't cut the cord yet. So, I mean, it would have been discovered right away, I think.
I like in the game, they never explain how she's immune. And so I think it kind of demystifies it in a way. I don't know if that's.
Did you like the way they explain how she's immune?
I think I was like, oh, but at the same time, part of me is like, I kind of like not knowing. It's just like random how Ellie is immune, but
she's a fungus.
I think like, are all pregnant women going to start getting bit by infected and then sever the cord, like in order to produce immune babies? Like, so that opens up a lot more questions. We'll maybe touch upon that more later. Any more thoughts on this opening sequence?
It's good.
All right. So Joel and Ellie make their way to the Fireflies, beat for beat, exactly like the game. Joel now is doing all the talking. Ellie is the one who's quiet and reserved. And then we get to the giraffe scene, which kind of opens her up. And then we have like a moment where Joel starts sharing about his life. There's a lot to talk about here. Let's first talk about that giraffe scene. Man, that looks so fake and green screen. Like I wish they actually went somewhere to a rooftop and just filmed it and then CGI the buildings in. But apparently the giraffe was real and then everything else was fake. I'm like, in that sequence, like because everything was fake, the giraffe looked fake. So I don't know. The final scene in this episode, it looks real. They shot it with mountains in the backdrop. It was gorgeous, I kind of wish they just went to a rooftop and filmed it. The sky looked fake. The clouds looked fake. It just looked like it was from the video game. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's fake as Job's background right now. That fake blue sky and the fake giraffe over there.
I mean, it's like, I don't know, and you can't get a real giraffe. I don't so.
No, that's
Oh,
the
it
thing.
was a real
They did get a
giraffe.
real
It's a
giraffe.
Oh,
real
was
giraffe.
it?
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
real giraffe.
Well,
but
I guess I
everything
got
else is-
fooled. Wow.
yeah.
It's a real giraffe, but everything else is blue screen.
Yeah, no, you're not the only one, Albert. I thought that the giraffe was fake too. I was like, you know what? They did their best with that giraffe. It was honestly
They
pretty
did
good.
their best.
And then I saw the behind the scenes episode, and I was like, that was a real giraffe.
Wow.
I thought it was CGI for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A
no,
really
I-
good
I-
CGI.
I thought it was fake also.
Yeah.
So I'm like, why go through the trouble of getting a real giraffe when everything else looks fake? Because like our eyes are just gonna think everything is fake except for the actors. Right. So
Yeah,
go-
that's
go
why,
f-
Mike, I texted you and I was like, this is like Jurassic Park. You know, like it was like very like I'm like, play the theme music. It's like the same thing.
Mm.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it does remind me a lot of Jurassic Park, story wise. It's like there's the wonder to seeing things that are bigger than we are and are alive, and it's this moment that turns Ellie around in her whole complexion and her whole demeanor. So it's such a key moment, just like in the game, and I really appreciated that. I liked that they were feeding the giraffe too, just like
Yeah.
Alan Grant in Jurassic Park.
Yep. This show does a lot of things where I have a gripe with it, and then something happens, and I'm like, I immediately forgive you. And
Yeah.
that's the scene when Ellie is
Yeah.
feeding the giraffe, and she's like giggling, and you don't.
Yeah.
After like seeing her be like so passive for the whole episode, and you see her like laughing like kids should laugh, I was like, all right, show, you got me. I'm
Good
okay
job,
with
show.
this. Yeah, good job with your CGI giraffe.
That's actually real.
Yeah.
All right. And then so after the scene, Joel actually shares a story about how he got that scar, and the guy who shot him was actually himself. He tried to take his own life because after Sarah died, he just lost his purpose. And I love that. I love that the fact that he couldn't do it, and then Ellie tells him that she's glad that it didn't work out, and that's just kind of like like they talk about it in the podcast. These characters don't say the words "I love you" or "I care about you." They say it in all these other ways, and he tells her he loves her. It's like, hey, tell me some puns, So yeah, I just love the writing of these characters, and the whole point of the show. I mean, the whole point of that Bill and Frank episode and Sam and Henry, all these people that they encounter is all about protectors and the protected. And when Joel loses his daughter, I think about my own children. You lose your kids, you kind of feel purposeless now. Your whole life is kind of centered around them. And so I love that he kind of, and maybe this is a little bit too much, but she says, "Oh, time heals all," but then he says to her, "It wasn't time. No, it's not time that healed everything." And he just kind of looks at her. I thought it was a little. I think that kind of crossed the line for me. I thought it was perfect.
Cheesy.
Yeah, it was perfect.
Cheesy.
It was perfect up until that point, and I'm like, oh, you didn't have to say that. Come on.
Yeah, I preferred Tommy or like baby girl over those like yeah, over that line. I was like, oh my gosh, like that was a little bit cringy for me too. So I'm right there with you, Mike.
Oh.
I don't know why.
I agree it's cringy, but I think it's on purpose. I think that it's to show just like that they're so emotionally stunted, like that them trying to acknowledge their feelings comes across really awkward and weird. And I feel like that's by design. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just poor writing. But I almost felt like it was like it gave me like teenager vibes. Like teenagers who like each other very clearly, but just can't bring themselves to say it. And it's just awkward, and it comes out a lot cheesier than it did in their mind or something. I just think it was a great character moment, but it could have been not on purpose. I'd like to think it was.
I want
game-
to see
forget-
where Albert lands on this, because I actually really like that scene.
Oh,
I
interesting.
want to
like
know.
that
scene.
I wanna know if
Interesting.
it's the only one.
You
It did not-
really liked it?
Yeah.
It didn't bother me. Yeah,
Hmm.
I thought that whole scene was actually kind of shocking when I think any sort of dialogue that had something to do with someone talking about how they almost tried to end their life was, I think the impact of how that whole story was delivered was it was nice to sort of see that how he finally was able to get over that. And I think for me it put more weight into how how he thinks. So I was fine with it.
Nice. Okay. Just wanted to make sure if I was going to get mobbed on this one. But yeah, I mean it's funny seeing your guys' opinions about that, or hearing your guys' opinions, because I was like reading Reddit and stuff about people's comments about it, and like all of them were like, dude, it wasn't time that did it line like destroyed them. And I was like, I mean, I don't think it like had that much of an impact on me, but I was like the moment he said it, I was like, you better not say anymore, because you got to end it here. And I think it's really good if you end it right there. And I just think about the equivalent of the emotional payoff in the game. And essentially what happens, Hannah, in the game is that when you meet Maria for the first time and you go to the camp, Tommy has a picture of Sarah and Joel together, and it's like her holding like her soccer trophy or whatever, and he offers to give it to Joel, and Joel sees it and he's like, he doesn't want to have anything to do with that past, it's too painful, so he turns down the photo. But when you get to that scene after the giraffe scene in the game, you find out that Ellie actually, or I think Ellie kind of takes the photo, like you see it.
She steals it like how she stole the rabbit from the old people.
Yeah. She steals the photo, and then this is the time when she gives it to Joel, and Joel accepts it this time. He's like, I guess you can't run away from the past. And then they
Why
kind of,
didn't they do that in the show?
Yeah, I
Oh
was
my
like,
gosh.
I was like, do not skip that. We need to see Sarah again in that picture, and then they skip it. And I'm like, what? The dialogue does not make up. Is not better than the picture scene, So I
Yeah.
wanted that picture when they're talking about the QZ and what happened immediately after the outbreak. I was like, okay, here we go, picture scene, and he does that thing about trying to kill himself. I'm like, okay, and then yeah, when they move on, I'm like, dude, Ellie, just freaking put your hand in your backpack and take that freaking photo out, and it never happens. And
Oh my gosh, what a great, why did they decide to take that out?
So I guess this is where we disagree, because I think that what they have in the show is as good as that scene in the game. I think Joel talking about how he wanted to end his life, and like how he just like didn't have any hope. I felt like it was a great character moment, and like it's one of those things where it's like both are really good to me, but clearly you guys just we're not vibing with this one.
Yeah, hot
I
take,
liked it.
but
I liked it.
Okay. All right.
I put it next to Pedro Pascal's performance in a Wonder Woman 1984. I was like,
Oh my God.
really, really down-ranking
Savage,
this.
dude.
I
like
didn't
that
think it was that
performance.
bad.
Jeez.
It was pretty bad to me because I think I have really high standards for him now. That it was almost like, what the? Because up until that point, I had to like literally like tears just appeared, like when he would say things, So like at that moment when it didn't happen, I was like, whoa, that must have been really bad.
Dude, that was a certified daddy moment for me.
Oh man, that picture though, yeah, I feel like that they should have definitely included that in there.
You really should go back, Hannah. You should really go back and on YouTube, and I would be curious to see your reactions to all the cutscenes and story beats and stuff.
No, Hannah, you should tell your husband to buy a PS5 and play The Last of Us. You got to play it.
Hey, my sister has the game.
Oh
She has
yeah,
both.
dude.
Yeah, she's been playing it again.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, you got to play it.
Crazy.
Okay, so let's move on to the hospital scene. All right, and I kind of want to let our newbie take the floor on this one. Okay, so Joel finds out that in order to make a cure, Ellie has to die. So Joel goes on a rampage and murders all the Fireflies, including Marlene. He then takes Ellie and then lies to her. about what happened. Secrets out of the bag. All right, let's hear from you, Hannah. What did you think about this?
Again, being like a TV junkie and a little bit more familiar with Hollywood, I was like, there's only like two ways this thing can end. So what I predicted was kind of similar to what happened. But not to the extent of like I didn't think he was gonna kill like everybody and like take her from like I didn't think about any of that. But as a video game, I think that totally makes sense because I feel like that's like a level that you're like playing, right? And like trying to get Ellie and like get out. Um, I don't know. I still have mixed feelings about just how the whole thing played out. And I don't know if it's because of how they like film the scenes or like whatnot, but it wasn't as crazy as I thought it would be, I think. I don't know. And again, I have nothing to compare it to though, right? Because I didn't play the game. So a thought that I had was like maybe it's very similar to how the game was, but with looking at your guys' face expressions, I feel like it's not. I feel like the game might have been crazier. More violent.
So I will say this, like the whole show is kind of like other stories that we've seen in movies and other other shows, like Children of Men. I think of that, right, where you have someone who's kind of messianic, like a savior for mankind in this post-apocalyptic world, and then they're the last hope, and their goal is the main character's goal is to basically escort that person to whatever beacon of light that there is in this dark place, that they're trying to kind of restore order back to the world. And the hero always makes the right choice. The hero always delivers that person. But I think what makes The Last of Us so special and so unique, and why it resonates with so many people, is that you have these people grow so attached to each other and they love each other so much, like an actual parent and child. And it just subverts all that, right? Now she has to die. And then because of the loss that he experiences, like, no, he can't, I'm not going to let this happen again to me. And he makes the wrong moral choice where he completely commits genocide, freaking destroys all the Fireflies and kills their leader. And then he lies to Ellie to cover it up. And so I just think, I think the whole game, when you're playing and trying to survive as these characters in the show, you're watching it, you think that's how it's going to end. You think he's going to make the right choice and either give his life for her, or she's going to give her life to save humanity. But the show just ends with them both alive and everyone else dead. And that's just, it's like, there's no story that ends this way. It's so complicated. You don't know how you feel because he makes the wrong choice, but it's kind of like a happy ending for him. He got his daughter back.
A friend of mine had brought up a very interesting point. He was a huge fan of the game as well, still is, and he said that when he played the game the first time, he didn't understand at all how Joel could do something that monstrous, whatever his reasons are. But now that he has daughters, he totally understands how Joel could do something like that, right? So at that point, it's that line really blurs between what you think is right and wrong. I mean, how would anyone be in that situation?
Yeah, even my wife, I asked her, like, do you think you could give up your kids to save the world? She's like, I would hope in that situation I could make that choice, but I don't know. And that's like crazy because it's coming from like my wife, who's a mom, and she's like a saint, an angel. And so for her to even question that, it's like, yeah, like when those parental instincts, the protector instincts as a parent, it really just comes out. Yeah, anyways, that's what makes it so compelling.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm trying to like walk back through my thought process, like, for the end of that episode. And I mean, I think number one, it didn't really help that I was already thinking about like how it could potentially play out. So I feel like maybe if I hadn't really thought about it, then maybe it would have been a little bit more shocking
Do you mean
or
play out
whatnot.
like in Last of Us 2 or the rest of the story in Last of Us
Yeah,
1?
because I already I already knew from the beginning that The Last of Us 2 existed. So maybe if I hadn't
I
known
see.
that there was a second game, like my thoughts around how the first show, I mean, the first season ends might have been different. You know what I mean? Like there could have been probably more possibilities, but I already knew that the second one existed. So those are already things I knew. So I think the setup wasn't great for me, but also I think my thoughts were that why would Joel want to sacrifice Ellie for all of these people that they encountered along the way that were like really crappy? You know what I mean? Like they just came from a town where there was like a freaking pedophile, leading like a cult. And I was like, he has no buy-in at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah, for me,
right.
I was like, the expectation is gonna be that he's gonna try to save Ellie, which is why I had even considered that being the end of this season. Yeah,
Mm.
because like the show is being very obvious about like this is what happens to people, when they're under duress or like, like crazy situation happens, like you live in a post-apocalyptic world. So for me, I was like, yeah, that like it wouldn't make any sense for him to be like, okay, like Ellie can die so she can be the cure for like humanity. Like I was like, that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't something in this world that they've crafted is I'm not even sure if is the vaccine's only going to make everything better that much. That is a thought that crossed my mind. But I wanted to go back and talk about the rampage because I thought it was actually kind of a little freakier in this version because in the video game you're just kind of blindly shooting, but in this one you see him being very methodical about how he kills everyone. Like he's really clearly thought this through. This isn't, this isn't just a guy going wild. He's being very, very calculated in how he does this.
Mhm.
So okay, so yeah, I'm glad you brought it back to the hospital scene where he's killing everybody. I thought there were some great moments, like him killing the Firefly, even though he surrendered, he just still kills him anyway. And then he shoots he shoots a soldier, but then he has this look on his face, takes out a knife and just stabs him and makes sure that that guy is dead. And it kind of shows that he enjoys it, just like the torture scene, the map interrogation scene, right? He kind of enjoys the violence. um I did not like how they presented this as a more of a montage with music playing over it. I wish it was an action scene that was just happening in real time, that he's just going Rambo on everybody. It's like a legitimate action scene. And this could have been a 10-minute long action scene, and we would not have found it boring. Like it could be really suspenseful and exciting. I just feel like the show constantly, and this is where I feel like the biggest downfall of the show is that it just shies away from the action. They keep assuming that audiences are going to get bored of watching, scenes that kind of resemble the game. But I don't think that's always the case. You can make compelling action scenes. Like I wanted, I blatantly said out loud in our group chat, like, dude, I want him to go John Wick on these guys. And it was just presented as like a montage with sad music playing over it. Um, I don't think it's terrible, but I just wanted more from it. And it kind of felt like they're just rushing towards the end. So I don't know. How did Job and Paul, what did you guys think about that?
Oh, pointing at each other. Yeah. um, yeah, I kind of I forget which one of you guys said that it felt creepier watching it this time. I felt that same thing. Um, it's just different vibes. In the game, there's like an alarm blaring throughout your whole rampage, right? Like, and there's this like chaos to it. That is very game like, but it also kind of creates a different feel. It's almost like he's just reacting. He's just going off of instinct, but here, yeah, it's like he made a predetermined decision. And actually in the game, actually, Mike, you were watching me play this for the first time, and you were like, oh, like there's some people you don't have to kill or something like that in the game, but you can if you want to. Um, do you, so there's like decisions, but you're also just reacting. Here, it's not that. It's a Joel has made a decision, and it's very clear he has a purpose for this. And I'm not too sure like which one resonates more. Um, and maybe this is just a function of knowing what's about to happen. I didn't feel any suspense or tension really watching it. It was kind of cool, like in seeing it in slow motion. It was a different feel, and yes, like the sad version of the this show's theme or the game's theme gives it some emotional weight, like some inevitability to it almost. Um, but I just feel like maybe because I didn't know, I already knew what was gonna happen. It just didn't impact as much, and I feel like because of the finale so short, it did feel like we rushed through that whole thing. It just kind of was like, oh, he's killed everybody, and it was like over the span of like a minute or two. So I agree, it's like shying away from the action, kind of actually. I I would imagine they did that to service the story, but it actually takes away from the story, which is interesting. Yeah.
I it's very difficult for me to like I'm going through the thoughts in my head, and it's hard to like put it coherently into words, so apologies if I ramble. But I think in the context of this show, violence has always been more of a reactive thing than a proactive thing. So in the sense that like I'm kind of right there with you where it's like I wanted more like John Wicking, right? The first thought that I had when that montage was happening was like, man, this would have been sick if like it was like a one shot take, you know, you just see him going through the floor or like through the levels of the hospital and just like blowing dudes heads off and stuff. But it also just made me realize that like the creator's intent, right? Neil Druckmann and Craig Mason, I don't think they at any point in the show did they want us to cheer for violence. I don't think they wanted us to be like, yeah, Joel, kill him, you know. As much as it would have been thrilling to watch, I think that's something that they clearly steered like away from. And so, you know, my favorite part in that whole section in the game is when um, Joel is carrying Ellie. You know, he lifts her up from the operating table, and he's running, and then that's the music that plays. The music that plays during that sequence is when in the show he's killing all these people. So I think the purpose of swapping those scenes and using the same piece of music is to kind of like imbue that same feeling. Like you're not supposed to feel like cathartic as he's killing them. Like you're supposed to feel like sad, like, oh, this is what Joel is becoming. This is what he has to be to save the person that he loves. So I think in that sense, like I get why they did it the way they did. And overall, I mean, I'm kind of with you guys where it's like we've played through the game, we've experienced it for the first time through the eyes of the game. So like we that can never be replicated. Like no matter how good something is, it's just, you know, the first time you experience something, it's always like that's the way that you'll remember it, right? And in this sense, like imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, right? If they had changed any part of this, I think that's when it would be like we would have been like, dude, like you guys messed up, you know, like the very scene at the end, like when it cuts off after she says okay, like I think there's some parts where it's like you just got to keep it the same way it is, you know. And for people who have never experienced the game, like that's how they experience it for the first time. So I think in that sense, like it's one of those things where it's like I can never truly love it as much as I did the first time when I played through the game, but I can just be like the proud parent who's seeing their kid at like score a home run at the baseball game, right? It's just like you did it, you know, like I'm proud of what the show has done. And I think just to kind of like talk about my biggest complaint with the show, which is the lack of infected, because all of the stuff that Mike you had gripes about, like don't be afraid to shy away from the action scenes. I feel like that's how you can service the infected, because it's like, it's much easier for us to be like, yeah, kill the infected, because we're not going to be like, no, clickers have rights too, or whatever, like they are kind of like a vehicle for us to just be like, yeah, just kill them, and especially the part that I had the biggest hang up on was the fact that they introduced very cool concepts. The concept that it's a network, it's a hive network, and
Yeah.
and like they never bring that up again, and we've already, I mean, I've already seen articles about how Craig and Neil were like, there's going to be way more infected in the next season, there's going to be more action and stuff, but I really do feel like they could have added the section where you have to sneak past the multiple bloaters in that would have been in this episode before they enter the hospital, because like as much as games, like you don't want to just make it like the game where you're mindlessly killing, right? But the relationship between Ellie and Joel is crucial in some of those situations, because you see them go through this crazy stuff together, and it's like you're surviving all of these bits, like running away from the bloaters, killing the bloaters, doing all that stuff in the game, and it makes you feel like you've been through war together. But you don't get that impact in the show because they didn't fight any of them. So it's one of those things where, I mean, I don't know, that to me is the biggest complaint that I have, where it's like I get why you didn't want to do it, but I really wish you just had like 2 or 3 more like action scenes with infected.
Yeah, I Paul, you're absolutely right on that. And they introduced this great concept, and that's all we ever saw out of it in episode 2. Like it was never expanded on or really fully utilized. So, and I think the way you sort of talked about your feelings about the hospital scene was like, it kind of made me think about like, that whole scene. I think if I had to point out one thing that was nagging me about it, it was that it did feel like it was like, 50% John Woo, like Mission Impossible 2, instead of like 100% John Woo, like hard boiled, that one take in the hospital. So yeah, I get that.
Yeah, and I think the purpose of that is to highlight the fact that Joel, I think Albert, you said this like many years ago when we were talking about the game when it came out. Like Joel is not a good guy. He's a
Yeah.
bad, and this scene really highlights that he is a bad guy. And then like the person you've been cheering for all this time, that you've been loving along with Ellie, is actually a bad person. And here he makes the wrong choice, the wrong moral decision, the selfish decision. But it's, in his eyes, in his story, it's right. And we've walked miles in his shoes, right? And then so we empathize with him, this bad person. I don't know, Hannah, if that was ever uh if it came off that way for your, as you viewed the show.
So if I'm understanding correctly, like in the game, you feel like Joel is a bad person because of all the things that he's done post Sarah, or because of this decision specifically?
Well,
Yeah, well, in both the
he's a
game and the
raider,
show.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was a raider himself.
Yeah, so all the things that he did and like all the people he killed and everything that happened in this like post-apocalyptic world. So we're supposed to like not like him because of that.
Yeah, I think the ending of the first game was divisive for that matter. Like not only that he kills all those people, but that he also lies to Ellie. I think that was a bit more. It was a bit more ambiguous in the game, like how people felt, and more people were divided on that. But I think the show makes it a little bit easier for people to be like, "Yeah, Joel did nothing wrong."
Yeah, I was gonna say that like it's interesting that you guys say that about the game, because I don't, in the show, like I didn't leave the show thinking like, man, he's such a bad person. He's a liar. I actually, I think I did text you, Mike, and I was like, Pedro Pascal was a liar. But it was more like, oh, sad for Ellie, he lied, kind of thing. Like it wasn't necessarily like, I hate this guy. I think how you end up feeling after the season is over is like, he had to do what he had to do, and you kind of like accept that he did what he did because of everything that he's been through. Kind of like what you said, Mike, like we've walked in his shoes kind of thing. And I think the other thing is like you never know who you're gonna be in like a post-apocalyptic world, so there is that too. So it's very interesting that that's what they tried to portray in the game specifically, and that the ending was that divisive.
Oh, there was way more discourse over the game's ending. I think when it first came out, they're like, "Oh, Joel's did the wrong thing." But I remember I explicitly remember like after I finished the game, I was like, even if, and you guys kind of touched up on this already, like even if Ellie is the cure, like this world is beyond saving to me. Like there's all these like their journey and like everything that they've experienced. It's like, why would you want to save these people? Like where in exchange you could just have someone who is essentially your daughter now. So for me, it was like I had a clear conscience. I was like, yeah, let's freaking whoop on these people, But it was definitely like there was more thorough discourse, I think, but the show kind of takes a side. I think.
But if
Yeah,
every episode was like, oh, sorry, Albert, you go ahead.
No, go ahead, Hannah.
I was just gonna say, but if every episode was like a Bill and Frank episode, then yeah, maybe the world might have been worth saving. It was like they obviously didn't play it out that way on purpose, right?
I think there are like pockets of goodness that you definitely see, but it's not like, it's almost like they exist, but it's almost like humanity has to start over again, and see where it goes. But like when I remember, I'm starting to remember that conversation, Michael, when I made that comment about Joel being a bad guy, that wasn't necessarily to like condemn him. He is a bad guy, but he's the bad guy in the same sense that everybody else in this world is a bad guy. Everybody's just surviving, and that's kind of what the whole thing is. And I think that's what makes the ending of the game and this show so fascinating. I think one of the reasons why I thought The Last of Us, the game, was such a masterpiece was it was not afraid to dwell into these moral gray areas about what it means to be alive or care for someone, and how does that weigh against the greater interests of others. So yeah, I think, and I think this show really, just the fact that it's still generating this same type of discussion 10 years later really goes to show you how powerful and almost perfect that story is.
Yeah, the ending reminded me a lot of The Dark Knight, where Batman and Gordon decide to lie about what happened with Harvey Dent in order to preserve peace in Gotham. And it's a little bit similar here, where this story also ends with a lie. And yeah, we'll see we'll have to see where it goes. I think we've already kind of talked about things that we would like to see them do differently in season 2, right? We've talked about pacing, not shying away from the action. I want to hear, Hannah, your predictions. Where do you think Last of Us 2 is going to go, just from your non-gamer background? Obviously you told me over text that you do know one thing that happens in the next game, so we won't talk about that. But yeah, where else do you think the overall story could go?
I mean, you mentioned earlier there's like a religious sect in the second game. So I'm assuming that like they encounter other groups of people, but yeah, I don't know. Narrative wise, like I'm not entirely sure like where it's gonna go. I don't even know if I could make any guesses. Like Mike specifically told me not to read anything online. So I was trying to think up like where would I go if I was like the creator from The Last of Us 2? And like I honestly do not know, because like if Ellie finds out that Joel lied, which I think at the end of season 1 they're alluding to it, I think, that she feels like he's not telling her the entire truth. I think she's like not stupid. So I feel like they kind of allude to that. And I think both of them, just their too good of actors to like that not to have been intentional. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Yeah. So I was like, no, that had to have been like put in there intentionally. So if then that's the case, then yeah, I don't know. Like it takes a toll on their relationship. But then from then on, where does it go? Like I have no idea. Like, oh, and then you mentioned the Easter egg, the girl in the previous episode. So maybe there's a relationship. I mean, there's like little things I could probably guess, but in terms of like the overarching like narrative, I have no idea. Fight more infected, obviously. You know, like, but it's like, how does it end? And then if they are working their way to like potentially making a third game, then like where the heck is this going? I have no clue. You know, so I think it's very interesting. Yeah, I
Well,
don't know.
I do want to tease you a little bit. So basically, when The Last of Us 2 was announced, Neil Druckmann was there at the announcement. It was a complete surprise. Actually, Paul was there at it's like a PlayStation Experience convention or something.
Yeah, I was at the Anaheim Convention Center.
Yeah, and so at the announcement, Neil Druckmann said that the core theme of the first game was about love, right? And they used gameplay, story, music, interactions, all these things to make the player feel that theme. And the second game, he said, was the counter, the opposite of that. The second game is about hate. And they use the very same things that make you feel love in the first game, but they make you feel hatred in the second game. And so I will tell you this about the second one. It's going to be very interesting how they try to translate that and adapt that to the screen, because in the second game, you play as Ellie, and you feel the things that they want you to feel, and it's very visceral. So I don't know how they're going to translate and adapt that to like a medium where you're just passively watching. So it'll be very very interesting. But that's just, I feel like it's a nice little tease, because if we were teased in the same way, and we had to wait like many years for The Last of Us 2. So I'll just leave you with that same little tease.
I think also, just to throw another wrench into that, I specifically remember, like, I was standing there and listening to them talk about this game and talk about how it's about hate. But after the game came out, Neil Druckmann was like, I originally said that the second game is about hate, but now I think it's about love. So he retracted his words.
Sure, yeah,
I can see
would
that.
So I would actually disagree with him, because it still is about hate.
Yeah.
But the hate stems from the love.
Yeah.
And they're not always separate things, like mutually exclusive things.
Right,
I think
yeah.
that's kind of what's the interesting thing about
Yeah.
this.
So I just wanted to say that to further mess with Hannah. So.
Sure. Yeah. I like what he said initially, so that's why I only tell that version of the story.
That's your canon.
Yeah, I don't like when he retracted that. I'm like, no, man, come on. The game is it's filled with so much hatred.
Well, I think question for you guys, you know, because all of you guys have played like both games. And I think like I remember when they announced that they were going to adapt the game into a show, like you guys were all excited and stuff. But do you think you were more excited about season 1 than you are about season 2, vice versa? Like, what are your thoughts about like what is potentially coming up?
Well, I think I can speak for everyone here. I think we were all a bit nervous. I mean, The Last of Us is like the crown jewel video game storytelling.
That's
I mean,
right.
if they get screwed up, then there's no hope for video game adaptations ever again. I'm glad to say that this wasn't the case this time. So now that we're over that hurdle, I will personally say I'm more excited to see how they adapt season 2. I think that's going to be the more difficult season to do. I have a theory that it will be split into 2 seasons, though. But that's
They already confirmed that.
Oh, didn't they?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, and there's a very specific way they can split it. It's like very clear. the way the game is structured, like there's a very clear point where season 2
Yeah.
could end, and then a season 3 could pick up
Yeah.
another part of the game.
Yeah, and they could do it sort of like the Lord of the Rings movies or something like that, and just kind of split it in a way that makes more sense, I think.
Okay, so I very rarely toot my own horn. I think maybe I do a lot of horn tooting, but here I feel like out of all of us, I think I was the most like, season 1 is going to be awesome. Like after I watched Chernobyl, I mean, I have the receipts in our thread to prove it, but I was like, this show is going to be awesome. Like Neil Druckmann is a part of it. Craig Mazin is amazing. Chernobyl's like one of the best miniseries. It is the best miniseries I've ever seen. So I was like, there's no way like they're gonna mess this up. I personally feel like. So, but I am a little bit more of the opposite, because I think now it's like, okay, they deserve their flowers, they deserve their praise. I am nervous for season 2, not because I don't think they're gonna do it well, but it's just like, dude, the second game is so divisive amongst fans. Like for me, it's like easily, one of the best games I ever played, and one of the best stories ever. But I am very nervous for them. Like I wouldn't say that they're not going to be like, it's not going to be good, but I'm like, I would hate to be them right now, because it is such a monumental task to, I mean, at the end of the day, they're not going to appease everyone. Like people are going to hate it, especially even like people who don't know what happens and they experience it for the first time. They're going to hate it for sure. But
well, and they do have one advantage. They've gone through it already. So
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely like, I very rarely had doubts about the first season. I'm sure like there were parts of me where I was like, because everyone here has, there's reason that you should doubt, because most video game adaptations suck. Like I've seen every live action Resident Evil movie. Like those are all garbage, dude. Like, but I love watching those. Yeah. So I get it. Like I get why everyone was nervous. But I think I had too much faith in Neil and Craig. But yeah, I am very nervous for the second season. So we'll see what happens, man.
I think as someone that hasn't played like any of the games, again, sorry, I keep restating this, but and I'd be curious how other people feel that have never played the game, but I'm not 100% sure I'm going to be back for season 2. I think yeah, I mean, hot take here, right? Yeah, like episode 1 of season 2 is going to be like the indicator if I'm going to come back, right? Like I'm going to continue on to the rest of the season.
I have to laugh at this one.
Do one episode and then we'll see. But to be honest, like I felt like at the end of season 1, I wasn't like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen in the next season? I was actually fine leaving it the way that it is, with how the narrative is, and understanding that Joel did what he had to do. Ellie probably knows what he did, and then not really knowing or caring what happens after that, to be honest. Because if, The Last of Us 2 has Ellie and Joel have like a rift or like a strange relationship because, she figured out he lied or something, then I'm like, I don't really know if I want to be there for that, because like the core of season 1 was really because of the two of them. So unless they're able to bring other characters in that I would really care about for whatever reason, like it would really have to be like really, really, they have to work really, really hard for that, I think. And I see Paul. But yeah, I don't know. So like I've never really felt that way after like a first season of a show where this is supposed to be like a cliffhanger, right? Like that there's going to be a second season, and then it's kind of like a cliffhanger.
I don't think so. I think the first game was created without the expectation of a second one in mind, and I think that's what makes the game so good. Yeah.
So in 2013, when the game ends, you're just like, wow, that's it, huh? That's how they're going to end the story. That's amazing. And so I think I feel you, Hannah, where, you know, you said like there doesn't need to be a second season, you know, where else can they go? And let me tell you, so when going into the second game, I didn't know, I think most of us didn't know anything about it. And it becomes very clear what genre it is. It's a very specific genre that the second game is, and it's like, okay, I'm on board. You're going to be on board for it. I just trust me. Yeah.
It's so funny because Hannah pretty much took the words right out of my mouth when I was playing the game, which is a pivotal scene happens in near the beginning of the second game. And I was like, basically my reaction was like, there needs to be a good enough reason, a justification in this story for the reason why it's being told the way it is. And at that point, that's when part of you is just like, I just want to finish this game in one sitting right now. I just want to figure out what happens in the end, because the story needs to be rewarding in the way that I want it to, because it's just so crazy, you know? And I think at the end, I was like, yeah, it was worth it. It was worth the way that it was told, but I don't want to reveal anything else, so.
All right. That brings us to the end of our discussion about The Last of Us Season 1, Episodes 6 to 9. Thank you for listening to us and for joining us for this discussion. And we'll see you next time on this podcast where we talk about movies and shows.
We're not done yet.
No. The Supreme Leader is wise.
I'm sure you are. Blow that piece of junk out of the sky!